Ashwood, a quiet little town tucked deep in the forests of Oregon, a place where families gather at Sunday service, neighbors greet each other by name, and the streets fall silent after dark. To an outsider, Ashwood looks peaceful, ordinary, almost too ordinary, but every town hides its secrets, and some secrets refuse to stay buried. On a stormy night, the body of a young woman is found in the woods, a strange symbol carved into the tree beside her. It's not just a murder, it's a message, a story written in blood, waiting for someone to read it. Enter Detective Marcus Hale, once a celebrated cop in New York, now disgraced, divorced, and desperate for a fresh start. He thought Ashwood would give him quiet. Instead, the killer brings the first clue straight to his doorstep. This isn't just a case, it's a game. The killer is the director, the town is his stage, and Hale, he's been cast in the lead role whether he wants it or not. As the bodies mount and the shadows close in, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The story isn't about solving a murder, it's about survival, and the final act. That's a part no one in Ashwood is prepared to play. Ashwood, this is Whispers in Ashwood. Chapter 1. The Quiet Town. The rain had a way of lingering in Ashwood. It didn't fall in sheets like back east, but it soaked the town in a cold, endless drizzle that seemed stitched into the bones of the place. The kind of rain that made wooden porches rot and neon signs buzzed like dying fireflies. Detective Marcus Hale stood outside his rented two-bedroom on Alder Street, watching the water bleed down the windshield of his Dodge Charger. He had moved to Ashwood less than a week ago, and already the silence of the town gnawed at him. He told himself this was what he wanted: distance from New York, from the scandal that sent him packing, from the faces of people who once respected him, but now only whispered behind his back. Ashwood, population barely 16,000, had promised obscurity, a fresh start, but Hale had learned long ago that promises, like people, tended to break when you needed them most. The police station sat 2 blocks from the diner, 3 from the church, and across the street from the courthouse. Ashwood wasn't big on surprises. The sheriff, Walt Briggs, was a heavyset man, with a gut that pushed against his belt buckle like it was fighting for air. Walt had greeted Hale with a handshake that lasted too long, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and the faint smell of whiskey before noon. "Welcome to Ashwood, detective," Walt had said. "Small town, we keep it simple here. No big city politics. You'll like it." Hale only nodded. He didn't like anything anymore. On his 3rd night in town, the call came. Body in the woods. Female. Young. Real mess. The deputy's voice on the phone had been strained, as if he'd never said the word body out loud before. Ashwood wasn't that kind of town, or at least, it pretended not to be. Hale drove 20 minutes north, past the sawmill, down a narrow gravel road that disappeared into the dark skeletons of Douglas firs. The rain had eased into mist, curling like smoke across the headlights. Flashing red and blue lights pulsed faintly through the trees, guiding him like a beacon. At the scene, a cluster of deputies hovered nervously, their boots sinking in mud. One young officer gagged into the brush. Sheriff Briggs stood stiffly beside a tarp-covered shape. "Not what you signed up for, eh, city boy?" Briggs muttered when Hale approached. Hale crouched, lifted the tarp, his jaw tightened. The victim was a woman in her 20s, pale face framed by tangled blonde hair plastered to damp earth. Her throat was cut cleanly, but it was antique. The wound that froze Hale's breath, it was the symbol carved into the tree behind her. A crude spiral intersected with jagged lines, almost ritualistic, dug deep into the bark with a knife. "Looks like more than a bar fight gone wrong," Hale said. Briggs grunted. "Some sicko passing through. We'll get the papers, maybe put a name out, but it's Ashwood, Hale. This town doesn't need panic." Hale shot him a look. "It already has panic. You just don't want anyone to see it." Briggs's jaw worked like he was chewing gravel, but he didn't answer. By morning, Hale had pored over what little evidence they had. The victim's ID said Rachel Whitman, 24, a student at a community college 2 towns over. Last seen leaving her part-time job at a cafe. No priors, no red flags. He visited her apartment, 1 bedroom, modest, scented faintly of lavender. On the nightstand sat a worn paperback, The Secret History. Pages dog-eared, passages underlined. Hale brushed his thumb across the margins, where neat handwriting in blue ink repeated phrases like "truth is never pure and we carry our sins." There were no signs of forced entry, Whoever took her had been efficient. Too efficient. Back at the station, Briggs clapped him on the shoulder. "Let it go, Hale. Not every murder's a mystery. Some are just ugly." But Hale had seen too many uglies to know better. Murder always had a reason, and killers always left something behind. That night, Hale returned to Alder Street, exhausted. He poured 2 fingers of bourbon into a chipped glass, sat in the creaking armchair by the window, and stared at the rain-swollen streetlights. Sleep came slow and jagged, dragging him into memories he'd fought to bury. Flashing cameras, courtroom whispers, the face of a woman in New York whose case had destroyed his career. He woke near midnight to a sound. Not the rain, not the hum of the fridge, a faint scrape at the door. He grabbed his pistol, heart pounding against his ribs like a drumline. Quietly, he moved to the front door, pressed his ear against it. Silence. He yanked it open, gun raised. No one. Just the wet hush of Ashwood at night. But then his eyes dropped to the doorstep. Someone had carved into the wood of his porch fresh cuts, splintered edges, the same spiral landline symbol from the tree where Rachel Whitman's body had been found. Hale's stomach tightened into a knot. He stepped back, eyes darting across the empty street. The shadows between the houses seemed alive, pulsing. This wasn't random. This wasn't a drifter. This was a message. And Marcus Hale knew, with a chill crawling down his spine, that the killer had already found him. She returned with 2 mismatched mugs and a cardboard banker's box. "I don't like leaving history to people who wish it away," she said, patting the lid. "So I keep clippings. Not everything, just the things that make my neck get cold. This town sheds what it can to keep moving, but paper remembers." Hale lifted the lid. Headlines from 2 decades were layered like sediment. Missing persons, forest discovery, unidentified woman found. He pulled out one from 2006. A jogger had found a woman in the woods north of town. No name released. No arrests. "Wait," he said, heart adjusting. In a photo blurred to preserve decency, he could just make out a tree trunk behind the sheeted form. The bark bore scars that caught the light in a familiar geometry. "You see it," Alma said softly. "Did the paper mention these marks?" "No," she said. "They didn't know to look. But I did. My ex-husband was a deputy. He came home sick one night, sat on the porch and cried. Said bad things have an author in Ashwood, and authors have styles." Hale sifted deeper. 1998. A woman found in a culvert off Old Mill Road. 2012. Another body in state forest land, but just across the county line. Investigated by a different jurisdiction. No coordination, no connections drawn. The marks were never printed. But in a photo that had escaped a copy editor's notice, there it was. A spiraled gouge, an artist's signature in negative space. "Who was sheriff back then?" Hale asked. "Walt's father," Alma said. "And then Walt. People liked them because they kept the temperature down. They're good men in some ways. But good men can be terrible archivists. Anyone ever talk about suspects?" "Whispers," Alma said, gazing out the window. "A loner who carved wood sculptures in the woods. A migrant worker blamed because he'd left town before the story got hot. A pastor who drank too much and cried in his sermons. But whispers aren't facts. I keep facts." She handed him a manila folder with notes of her own in tidy cursive. "Dates, places, weather, moon phases. I am not a detective," she said. "But patterns are like him, Melody Sif. You hear them enough. You know when one is off-key." Hale made notes, his mind drawing lines across years like telephone wires, humming with static. The spiral wasn't new. The performance bodies arranged. Signatures carved belonged to an auteur who had learned to change pace when attention got too pointed. Whoever was behind this didn't come and go. They stayed. They evolved. And now they'd carved his porch. Alma watched him. "Be careful, detective. Walt doesn't like old stories. They cut into new funding. Grants, development, the Hollis money. This town sells itself as safe." The door opened behind them. Hal didn't look, but he felt a shift, a shadow thickening. Sheriff Briggs's voice filled the quiet reading room like a bar fight. "Hale," he said, "your car's outside. Thought I'd find you up here reading ghost stories. Doing your job for you." Alma murmured under her breath, in a tone sweet enough to be plausible deniability. Briggs ignored her. He pointed at the box on the table. "Close that. Alma, you don't show him this trash." "It's public record," Alma said, "and he's the public." Briggs stepped closer to Hale. "I told you to keep this tidy. You stir up those old cases, UL put a lot of good folks through a lot of bad nights for no reason. There's a reason, Hale said. The reason is, a woman is dead, and maybe she's not the first. Maybe Rachel Whitman is connected to Briggs. Slammed his palm on the table hard enough to rattle the mugs. This is my town. We don't build conspiracy castles because some big city detective misses the noise. Ashwood isn't a TV show. It's people who have to get up tomorrow and send their kids to school. Hale stood, meeting him toe-to-toe. Then they deserve the truth. What they deserve is peace, Briggs said, then glanced at Alma with a look that promised a budget review. You best be careful, Marcus. We brought you here to do a job, not to stage a comeback. He left. Alma exhaled the breath she'd been holding. He was greener when he started. The sun bakes people into what they are. Hale gathered the clippings Alma would let him borrow and tucked them into a folder. Thanks. Bring them back, she said. And if you get yourself killed, donate your notes to the Historical Society so I can be smug at your funeral. He smiled despite himself. Outside, the sky had lightened. A few kids pedaled bikes past the courthouse, hoods up, tires hissing on wet pavement. Hale's Charger was parked between a minivan with cheerleading decals and a city truck. He walked slow, letting the morning's threads tighten into a net. Church, foundation, old cases, a sheriff who needed quiet more than answers. He popped the trunk to toss the folder in, then paused. A single white envelope lay centered on the trunk floor like it had been measured. No stamp, no address, just his last name in block letters. Black marker bled a little into the paper. Hale. He looked around. No one. A dog barked across the street, then thought better of it. Hale slid on a glove and lifted the flap with the edge of a key. Inside was a strip of glossy photo paper, cut from a larger sheet, not a picture, no, a piece of one. In this fragment, the edge of a porch, a sliver of a threshold, the corners of a spiral, fresh and wet. His porch, last night, printed hastily, the color off, the shadows too blue, and beneath it, a typed note on plain white, 12-point font, no frills, as if a menace had found Microsoft Word. You should have stayed in New York. The words pressed into him like a thumb on a bruise. Whoever this was, not just watching, documenting, curating, keeping trophies, not just of lives, but of stories. And now, a new character had entered their narrative, and they were welcoming him with a warning. Hale lifted his eyes to the library windows, saw Alma's silhouette moving among the stacks like a patient ghost. Across the street, Sheriff Briggs talked to a city worker, laughing too loud. The church steeple in the distance pointed upward like a reminder no one obeyed. And somewhere between those markers, someone watched. Hale slipped the note back into its envelope, sealed it inside an evidence bag in his glove box, and slid behind the wheel. The rain had started again, fine and relentless. He turned the key and listened to the engine settle into a low, stubborn growl. New York had spit him out. Ashwood had swallowed him whole. He checked the rearview mirror and found nothing there. He pulled into traffic anyway, driving toward a town that pretended not to remember, with a piece of its memory riding shotgun. Chapter 2. Shadows of the Past. Morning bled into Ashwood through a ceiling of low pewter clouds. Marcus Hale stood on his front porch with a paper cup of coffee, looking down at the fresh carving in his threshold. The spiral cut into the grain had turned dark as the wood drank last night's rain. He snapped a few photos with his phone, measuring the grooves with a tape measure he found beneath the sink. Whoever did it hadn't rushed. The cuts were deliberate, confident, like someone signing their name. A cruiser rolled to a stop at the curb. Deputy Nina Park stepped out, compact frame in a black rain jacket, dark hair bundled under a cap. She took everything in with a quick, precise scan that reminded Hale of the NYPD detectives he used to work with, people who had learned to think faster than fear. Sheriff said, "You called," she said, glancing at the carving. "That the same symbol from the tree?" "Close," Hale said. "Depths shallower. Same hand, though." Nina crouched beside the threshold, touched the edge of a cut with a gloved fingertip. "You get any sleep?" "I've had worse nights." She looked up at him. "We should dust for prints, though if they're good." They wore gloves. "They're good," Hale said. Nina took a few photos of her own, then stood and met his eyes. "Sheriff wants to call it a prank. Says some teens saw the news and got cute, and you. I think teens tag bridges and vape behind the bleachers. They don't carve calling cards on a cop's porch. But I'm just a deputy," she said. Wry smile that didn't quite get there. "You sure you want to plant your flag on this?" "Detective, it's your first week." Hale took a sip of coffee that had already gone cold. "I don't pick the fights. They tend to pick me." They bagged a few splinters and a wet cigarette, but near the curb Nina found with a flashlight. It felt planted too close, too easy. Hale noted the brand anyway, a cheap menthol, and watched his street like it might blink. At the station, Sheriff Walt Briggs squinted at the photos, his face reddening from the neck up. "So some joker scratches up your porch. Congratulations, Hallie, you've discovered vandalism." "It's the same symbol," Hallie said evenly. "It's a swirl with lines. If I start locking up every swirl I see in this town, I'll need a bigger jail." Briggs pushed the pictures back. "Don't waste my time with this. It's my time I'm wasting." Briggs leaned forward, elbows creasing the thin wood of his desk. "Listen to me. You're new. You don't know Ashwood yet. We handle our own here when we handle anything at all. That girl's murder is bad enough. We guarantee need you scaring the good people into thinking we've got the Zodiac out there." "The good people already think whatever they think," Hale said. "Our job isn't to make them comfortable." Briggs stared at him, jaw working. "You came here to get away from heat, didn't you? Then quit stoking the fire." Nina stood near the door, caught between two gravities. Hale pocketed the photos. "I'm going to talk to the church." Briggs waved a hand. "Knock yourself out. Say a prayer while you're there." Our Lady of the Pines sat at the edge of town, a modest stone parish with narrow stained-glass windows that turned the grey morning into slices of coloured light. Inside, the air smelled of candle wax and pine cleaner. A volunteer arranged hymnals while an old man polished brass candlesticks with a reverence that made everything else feel too loud. Father Gabriel Cole emerged from the rectory, man in his 50s with kind eyes, set in a face that remembered frowning. His clerical collar was crisp, but his hands were nicked in small, healed cuts that suggested someone who fixed more than souls. "Detective Hale," he said softly, as if a church required every word to be measured. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." "You knew Rachel Whitman," Hale said. "Everyone knew Rachel," Father Cole replied, leading him into a small office lined with theological texts and a single framed photo of a youth group at a camp-out. She volunteered with the outreach program food pantry, tutoring for GED candidates. She had a way of making people less afraid of their own failures. Was she close to anyone here? Any conflict? Any concerns? Father Cole took his time answering, and the pause told Hale as much as the words. "There are always concerns," the priest said. "We keep an open door. People come when their lives fall apart." "I'm not asking for confession," Hale said. "I'm asking if you saw her with anyone who made you uneasy." A muscle in Father Cole's jaw flickered. He tapped the arm of his chair once, a tick of thought. "There's a line, Detective, but she spent a lot of time coordinating donations with the Hollis Foundation. Fundraisers, mostly. Her program got a grant last year. The Hollis family, as in the sawmill, the same. Their money is in half the bricks in this town. Did Rachel spend time at their house?" "I don't know," Father Cole said. "I know she met with the liaison, a Mr. Kendrick, in the foundation office downtown. She never told me anything that set off alarms." He hesitated. "She was bright and restless. She wanted out of here, out of Ashwood, out of whatever kept her from sleeping." "We all have those things," Father Cole said, looking at him as if through the collar's small white square he could see deeper than Hale wanted. "You do too." Hale rose. "If you think of anything else, I'll call," Father Cole said. He followed Hale to the nave. "Detective Evil loves secrecy. So does shame. If you find yourself keeping either, come back." Outside, the rain had thinned to mist again. Hale stood on the stone steps and looked across town where the sawmill's smokestacks loomed like exhausted sentries. The Hollis estate lived on the western ridge, where the pines gave way to a winding road and a gated drive that opened after Hale announced himself. The house wasn't ostentatious timber and glass spread low and wide, a kind of money that had learned to be quiet. A woman in her early 60s waited under the overhang, a plaid shawl around her shoulders, as if a photograph had instructed her to be tasteful. "Detective Hale," she said. "Margaret Hollis. My assistant said you had questions. Thank you for seeing me." "Of course," she said. "Sad business, that girl." She led him into a living room with a stone fireplace and a view that ran all the way to town. Photographs lined a side table. Children on boats, a young man in a graduation gown, Margaret, and a tall man, her late husband. If Hale remembered the obituary in the diner, Edward Hollis timber dead of a stroke 3 years back, a man in his 20s entered, broad-shouldered and a tempting casual, like a suit forced into a hoodie. "You, the New York guy?" he asked, and the accent was local, wrapped around a podcast-fed awareness of bigger worlds. "Ethan," Margaret said mildly. "Manners." Ethan shrugged at Hale. "We heard you transferred. Word gets around. Word seems to jog in this town," Hale said. "I won't take much of your time. Rachel Whitman volunteered at Our Lady of the Pines. The program received a grant from your foundation." "Many programs receive grants," Margaret said. "We believe in supporting Ashwood." "Did Rachel ever come here?" Hale asked. Margaret's smile did something small and practiced. "I don't recall. Our foundation has an office in town. Mr. Kendrick handles application logistics." Ethan glanced at a spot just over Hale's shoulder. "I saw her once. At a gala. She was at the volunteer table handing out name tags and those dumb ribbons," he said. "She was nice." "Did you talk to her?" Hale asked. "Small talk. The weather. School. She knew about the mill." "Asked questions," Ethan said. "Why are you asking us?" "We didn't, Ethan," Margaret interrupted, still mild. "Detective, we'll have Mr. Kendrick send over any relevant emails. If we can help, we will." Hale looked at the view again. Ashwood lay below, the church steeple, a thumbtack in the grey. "I'll need a list of attendees from that gala," he said. "And the foundation employees Rachel met with, of course," Margaret said. "We'll see what we can compile." There was the tiniest emphasis on "we" LLC that told Hale his request was being routed to a lawyer. On his way out, Ethan followed to the steps, hands jammed in pockets. He spoke quickly, without meeting Hale's eyes. "Rachel had this way of asking questions like she was already suspicious of the answers. Doesn't play well here. People like their stories neat. You and Rachel ever meet after the gala?" "No," Ethan said, too quickly. "No. Look, detectives, this town is a pot with a lid on it. If you're here to stir, just don't let the whole thing overflow on you." Hale watched his breath in the cold. "That a warning?" "A fact," Ethan said, and went back inside. The diner on Main was the only place in town where the coffee came burned on purpose. Millie worked the counter, hair in a bun like the crown of a hammer. When Hallie slid onto a stool, she topped off his cup without asking. "You look like you wrestled with sleep and lost," she said. "You should see the other guy." She hooted softly. "Everyone's talking about that poor girl. My sister says it's like the old days. I told her not to say that where folks can hear. You know how people get. The old days." Hale stirred sugar he didn't need. "What old days?" Millie's eyes darted toward the far booth, where two men in work jackets shot looks over their shoulders between bites. She wiped the counter in an anxious ellipse. "There were things. Years back. Bad things never solved. But we don't bring that up. People round here figure if you don't name a thing, you can starve it to death. Doesn't work that way," Hale said. "I know. But I got a daughter who walks home from band practice, so I drink 2 fairy tales when they can do me a kindness," Millie said, then leaned in. "You want names? You go see Alma at the library. She remembers everything people don't want remembered." "Thanks," Hale said, and left cash under the salt shaker. The library sat in a 2-story brick building across from the courthouse, with carved stone letters that said Ashwood Public, as if the building had forgotten the word library mid-thought. Inside, it smelled of dust and optimism. Alma Reyes kept her hair in a silver braid and wore reading glasses on a chain that swung like a pendulum when she walked. Her smile was a pin pulled from a grenade, dangerous if you underestimated it. "Detective Hale," she said, before he could introduce himself. "I heard about you. Don't worry, not from Walt, from the Whisper Network. Coffee, please." Chapter 3. The Suspects. The diner was quieter than usual that morning. Conversations died when Marcus Hale walked through the door, and the soft clink of forks on plates filled the silence like nervous applause. Hale ordered black coffee and toast he wouldn't eat, sliding into a booth by the window. He needed space to think, to map out faces and names, to start trimming down the shadows into suspects. Rachel Whitman's death wasn't isolated. Alma's files had made that much clear. The spiral carved into the wood wasn't graffiti, it was authorship, and authors had patterns. The question was, which of Ashwood's residents had been writing tragedies for 20 years while no one noticed? He jotted down 4 names in his notebook. 1. Father Gabriel Cole, compassionate, but withholding. Could he be more than a priest with secrets? 2. Ethan Hollis, privileged son with a temper just beneath his smile, entitled enough to think he could play God. 3. Councilman David Kendrick, the Hollis Foundation liaison. Money moved through him, and money always left trails. 4. Oliver Grant, the reclusive woodcarver Alma had whispered about, a ghost in his own hometown. He underlined the names, then shut the notebook. That afternoon, Hale started with Oliver Grant. Grant's cabin sat on the far side of Mill Creek, tucked into pines so thick the sunlight broke into slivers. Smoke rose from a rusted stovepipe, and the front yard looked more like a graveyard for lumber than a home log stacked haphazardly. Unfinished carvings scattered like bones. Wooden figures stood half buried in mud. A deer with hollow eyes, a child without arms, a faceless man in a cloak. Hale knocked. The door creaked open an inch. A pair of eyes peered through the gap-bell, sharp, like a hawk that hadn't eaten in days. "Oliver Grant?" Hale asked. Silence. Then the door opened wider. Grant was in his 50s, gaunt, with a wiry beard and hands stained with sawdust. He wore a flannel shirt buttoned wrong, like he hadn't noticed or hadn't cared. "You're the New York cop," Grant said, voice gravelly. "Detective Marcus Hale. Can I come in?" Grant stepped aside. The cabin smelled of wood shavings and stale coffee. Every surface was covered with carvings, angels with wings broken, animals twisted mid-scream, masks with jagged grins. "You knew Rachel Whitman?" Hale asked. Grant shook his head slowly. "I don't know the names of ghosts. She wasn't a ghost. She was Grant gave him a look that carried no malice, only certainty. "Everyone in this town is a ghost, detective. Some just don't know it yet." Hale studied him. "You carve symbols into your work, spirals, jagged lines. I saw one outside." Grant's mouth twitched. "I carve what I see in my head. The marks in the woods there, not mine. Convenient." "I don't carve in blood," Grant said flatly. He picked up a small figure from the workbench, an unfinished woman with her arms raised, face still blank. "But I know whoever did is telling a story. And stories, they need an audience." Hale pocketed the words, but his gut told him Grant wasn't the kind to hide ritualistic murders for 20 years. His madness was too honest, too visible. Still, Hale wrote his name in darker ink. Next was David Kendrick. The foundation office was downtown, a glass front building squeezed between a bakery and a law firm. Kendrick's office was sleek, filled with photos of him shaking hands with donors, cutting ribbons, kissing babies at parades. A man built for appearances. Kendrick himself was mid-40s, expensive suit, smile like a blade. He shook Hale's hand too firmly, leaning in with politician's charm. "Terrible tragedy about Rachel," Kendrick said, lowering into his leather chair. "We're all mourning." "You worked with her," Hale said. "She volunteered, helped with fundraisers, outreach events. Bright young woman. Such a shame. You were close." Kendrick spread his hands. "Close? No. Professional. I managed dozens of volunteers. She was enthusiastic, driven. That's all." Hale leaned forward. "Her family says she'd been stressed, restless. Did she confide in you?" "Detective, I'm a busy man. I don't have time to be a therapist for every kid who passes through here." Kendrick smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. "You're new, so let me give you some advice. Dante, let Ashwood's tragedies become your tragedies. This town's grief has a way of pulling men under." Hale stood. "You seem awfully calm for someone whose volunteer turned up butchered." Kendrick's smile faltered just long enough to show a crack. "Because I've learned calm is the only currency that keeps this town running." That night, Hallie returned to the church. The nave was dim, lit only by the flicker of candles. Father Cole stood at the altar, head bowed. "Detective," he said when Hale approached. "Back again. You didn't tell me Rachel was asking questions about the Hollis Foundation," Hale said. Cole sighed. "Because Rachel was always asking questions. About money, power, faith. She had a fire in her that scared people. She saw the cracks others ignored. She confided in you. She told me she felt watched, that shadows followed her home. I thought it was anxiety. I told her to rest, to pray. And now she's dead." Father Cole's jaw tightened. "Do you blame me for that?" Hale held his gaze. "I blame whoever carved their signature into her death. But I think she confided in you more than you're saying." Cole's eyes flashed, but he said nothing more. It was after midnight when Hallie headed home. The streets were empty, fog pooling low and thick. He parked outside his apartment, scanning the shadows. Nothing moved. He climbed the steps, every nerve on edge. At the top, something glinted under the porch light. A thin chain. He crouched, heart tightening. It was a necklace, silver, with a small charm in the shape of a crescent moon. He'd seen it before, in the crime scene photos of Rachel Whitman. Her necklace. Someone had left it on his doorstep, just like the spiral. Hale scanned the street, hand on his pistol. The fog pressed against the houses, swallowing sound. Somewhere out there, someone was watching. He tightened his grip on the necklace. The killer wasn't just taunting him now. They were inviting him into the story and leaving him props. The audience had been chosen, and Marcus Hale was center stage. Chapter 4, Blood Ties. The necklace lay on Marcus Hale's kitchen table like a moon fallen out of the sky. He'd sealed it in a Ziploc because the station had somehow run out of small evidence bags. Ashwood, where bureaucracy outpaced supplies, where a murder felt like a budgetary inconvenience. He sat with the house dark and the chain catching the thin blue of morning, listening to the refrigerator hum and the rain tap the window. He'd spent the last hour replaying the moment his fingers had lifted the charm from his porch. The way the metal had been warmer than the night air, as if it had only just left someone's skin. He called Deputy Nina Park at 6:30. She answered on the first ring, voice rough with sleep but awake fast. "You got gloves?" he said. "For what?" "A delivery from our friend. Rachel's necklace." Nina exhaled hard enough that he heard it fuzz the line. "I'm on my way." By 7, the necklace sat in a proper evidence bag with tags, and the satisfying squeak of paperwork being completed the way the state would like it. Nina took photos, close-ups of the crescent charm, the clasp, the chain's kinked links. "No note, no fingerprints so far," she said, leaning away from the table like the thing might jump. "No need," Hale said. "The message is the delivery." She watched him. "You need sleep. I need answers." She nodded at the bag. "Sheriff's going to call this a plant. Say someone stole it from the evidence room and dropped it to mess with you. Then he can show me the checkout log from the evidence room," Hale said, knowing there wouldn't be one. Not in a place where the chain of custody belonged to whoever shouted the loudest. Nina's mouth tugged. "He'll shout. He's been practicing. Let him." Hale grabbed his coat. "I'm going to see Rachel's family." "You want me to come?" He hesitated. "You'd make it official." "We are official," Nina said. "Then come," he said, and tried not to feel how much better the word made the morning. The Whitman house sat on a quiet street shaded by maples, a white rental with a porch that sagged like it had stopped, believing in its job. A pot of dead mums sat by the steps, of all optimism that Ashwood's weather ate. A wind chime clinked out back, brittle as a laugh, with bad news behind it. Leah Whitman answered the door. 26, Hale guessed, with Rachel's hair color but cut short, held back with a bandana that didn't quite corral the pieces. Her eyes were red in a way that wasn't just from crying. The red that came when crying stopped doing anything. "You're the detective," she said. No question in it, just a statement of someone who'd learned to skip pleasantries. "Hale," he said. "This is Deputy Park. We wanted to." "Come in," she said quickly, glancing past them to make sure the street wasn't listening. "My mum's not here. She's at church. She thinks praying is a task." They stepped into a small living room with thrift store furniture arranged in code around the TV. Photos covered one wall. A graduation cap bobbing above a sea of blue gowns. 2 girls on a beach at sunset. A father-aged man with a shaved head holding up a fish. A framed print on a shelf, read "Blessed" in cursive like a dare. Leah crossed her arms tight over her chest. "I knew you'd come. I thought it would be yesterday." Nina softened her voice. "We had to notify extended family. Talk to the coroner." "Yeah," Leah said. "The coroner. He looked like he delivered mail before this." She rubbed her forearm with the heel of her hand. "What do you need?" "Anything Rachel said in the days before she died," Hale said. "Texts, calls, things that felt off, even if they didn't make sense." Leah stared at him with a kind of relief, moving just under anger. She was scared. She tried to pretend she wasn't, because pretending is for people like us. But she kept checking the window at night. She stopped using the front door. She swallowed. "She asked me to." Her voice thinned. She scented it again. "She asked me to hold on to some things." She disappeared down the hall and came back with a shoebox that once held pink sneakers. Inside, a flash drive taped to the lid, a stack of receipts, a spiral notebook with the cover half torn off. bank deposit slips, a disposable camera still in its cardboard sleeve, like it had been preserved for an archaeological dig. Leah put it on the coffee table with the reverence of a confession. She said, "If anything happened, I should give this to someone not from here. No offense," she added to Nina without irony. "None taken," Nina said. Hale pulled on gloves and opened the notebook. Rachel's handwriting was neat, deliberate, each letter pressed hard enough to emboss the next page. The first page was a list of initials, with arrows and question marks. HDK, GCOG, a few had notes. EH Gala, DK, Grant, GC, Confession, OG, Woods. He didn't like seeing the town translated into code that matched the list in his head. The convergence of suspicion closing like jaws. "She told you any of this?" Haley asked. Leah shook her head. Rachel liked puzzles more than she liked solutions. But she had bruises. Once, on her wrist, she said she bumped into a door, and we both pretended to believe it, because it was a weekday and there were things to do. "Did she have a boyfriend?" Nina asked. Leah's mouth hardened into the idea of a smile. Rachel dated aspirations, sometimes men attached to them. She had this need to be near the source of power, not to use it, just to interrogate it, to see if it would blink. "Names," Hale said. "I don't know." She was discreet when it mattered, and painfully honest when it wouldn't help. Leah said. She pointed at the receipts. "Those are from the foundation lunches and the church pantry. The bank slips. Look." Hale leafed through the slips. Small cash deposits irregular. One larger one, $1,000 2 weeks before Rachel was killed. Source line blank. "She didn't have that kind of money," Leah said. "She could barely pay for gas." "Did she say where she got it?" Nina asked. "No," Leah said. "But the night she brought home that camera," she pointed at the disposable, she said, "sometimes people tell the truth when they think you're not looking." Then she laughed, but it wasn't the right laugh. Hale slid the camera into a bag. "We'll get the photos developed." Leah nodded, and then held on to the nod like it could keep her steady. "Detective," she said, "do you think she'd do? You think this was a random crazy person?" "No," Hale said, "because sometimes the truth is the only mercy." Leah's eyes shone. "Good. Then make it mean something." He met her gaze. "I'll try." She crossed the room, grabbed a framed photo from the shelf. She handed it to him. Two girls, sunburned and squinting into the camera, arms laced around each other's shoulders. "We used to make up stories," Leah said. "We'd sit on the porch and invent mysteries and decide who the killer was, and then change it 3 times before we finished our popsicles." She wanted to be the person who figured it out. Not the word choked. She pushed past it. "Not this." "I'll call you," Hale said. "Don't call," Leah said. "Show up. People don't say true things on the phone." As they left, a tan sedan slowed at the corner, the driver's face a smear behind glass. Hale clocked the plate and memorized the sequence without meaning to. An old habit he didn't know how to quit. The sedan rolled on. On the porch, Nina breathed into her hands. "She's strong. She's held together by fury," Hale said. He glanced back at the dead mums. "I've seen worse glue." "What do you make of the money?" Nina asked. "Someone fed Rachel just enough to see where she'd go with it," Hale said, "or to keep her from asking why." They'd barely reached the street when Hale's phone buzzed. "Unknown caller," he answered, and his name came back to him, spoken in a voice he recognized to late Sheriff Walt Briggs. "Jogger found something up by Silver Creek," Briggs said. "Don't make me say it over the phone." "How far?" Hale asked, already walking for his car. "Trailhead off County 9. I'm 5 minutes out." "You better beat me there if you want the first look before the TV cameras. I am not calling." The line died. Nina had heard enough to start the engine before he slid into the passenger seat. "Silver Creek," she said. "Drive," he said, and she did. Lights off, speed honest. Rain combed the windshield into threads. The pines clumped into a moving wall. The trailhead was a dirt pullout with a weathered map of the park and a bulletin board posted with bare warnings and an outdated flyer for a 5K. 2 cruisers idled, their light bars still, their hoods beating water. A young deputy stood with a blanket around a woman in running clothes who stared at a fixed point and worked to keep breathing like it was a new skill. "Up there, 1/4 mile," the deputy said when he saw Hale. "She didn't touch anything." He said it like he needed a gold star. Hale and Nina took the path at a fast walk, boots skidding in wet leaves. The creek hissed somewhere to their left. The forest smelled green and clean, like it had nothing to do with what was about to be. The trail widened at a bend and opened onto a clearing where ferns crouched and cedars shivered. It only took one more step for the air to change. Hale had learned that death made the air different. A weight, a silence that remembered. She lay at the base of a cedar, back against the trunk, like someone had sat her down there for a rest she didn't get up from. Brunette, hair soaked and slicked to her head, cheeks grey with a hint of blue. A scarf was knotted at her throat, tight, simple. She wore a plaid shirt and jeans and trail shoes, too new for mud. In the cradle of her open hands, a white envelope, and carved into the cedar behind her, deep and fresh enough to shine wet against the bark. The spiral intersected by jagged lines. Nina went still beside him. "Jesus, don't let him hear you call him," Hale said, before he could stop himself. They moved in, careful on the loam. Hale crouched without touching. The scarf hid the wound he didn't need to see to know was there. He could smell copper threaded into rain. He leaned just enough to read the name typed on the envelope. Hale, the same font as before, the same emptiness of flourish. "Bag," he said, and Nina handed him one. He eased the envelope into it without breaking the clammy grip of the dead woman's hands. Her skin gave a little, as if it had recently been taught the wrong thing. "Recognize her?" Nina asked. "Not yet. Jogger said she didn't see anyone. No cars but hers at the trailhead." "He walked," Hale said. "Or he watched from the trees and pretended to be a wind." A twig cracked behind them. Sheriff Briggs pushed through brush, breathing hard. "Damn it," he said. Then again, softer, "Damn it." He looked at the spiral and then away, at the woman's face and then his boots. "This is a copycat," he announced, the line already rehearsed, the interview already in his head. "Sick joke." "Funny," Hale said. "I don't feel like laughing." "Bag that," Briggs said, nodding at the envelope. "Don't open it until we're back." Hale looked at him until Briggs stopped telling him things he already knew. The three of them stood in a triangle. Law, law, and what law couldn't stop. A crow landed on a branch above them and complained to the sky. Another answered from farther back in the trees, their voices arranging into a rough chant. Hale's skin went cold. "Scene's yours," Briggs said, motioning to the deputies, coming up the path with tarps and cameras. "We handle this quiet. No connections to anything else. You hear? You want quiet, Walt?" Hale said softly, "Tell him to stop writing." Briggs swallowed what he wanted to say and settled for walking away with extra noise. Nina glanced at the envelope in the bag. "You going to open it?" "Back at the car," he said, though every nerve insisted on now. He scanned the clearing. No footprints, but there's the rain had done its kindness. But there, half hidden under a fern, a glint. He pointed. Nina angled the flashlight down and found a small black rectangle lodged in the wet. A trail camera, cheap, with a cracked plastic strap, its latch half open. Hale snapped on fresh gloves and lifted it. The SD card slot was empty. Of course it was. The camera itself was scratched, a brand you could buy at the gas station for cash. "Planted?" Nina asked. "Or harvested?" Hale said. He turned the unit over and saw, not much, but on the back, a sticker. He peeled it off with one nail. A fragment of glossy paper came away, torn. The remaining part showed a blurred swath of porch wood, a corner of a doorframe, and the ghost of a spiral in the grain his. He slid the fragment into another bag. "He filmed her," he said. "He filmed my porch. We're not the audience, we're extras." They carried the envelope back down the trail, the forest pressing close. At the cruiser, Hale set the bag on the hood and slit the top with a pocket knife. Inside lay a single folded sheet of paper and something heavier. He slid out the paper first. It wasn't a note in the local style. It was a photocopy of a tabloid article from years ago. Edges ragged, headline bold, NYPD Detective Hale, cleared in evidence tampering scandal. Victim's family demands justice. Below, a photo of him leaving a courthouse, jaw clenched. A woman in the background holding a sign that said, "You can't fix a dead daughter." Nina's eyes moved over it. "He knows about New York," she said. "Everyone knows about New York," Hale said. But the room behind his ribs had opened, and it wasn't the forest anymore. He unfolded the paper further, and a Polaroid slid out, its chemical heart still rich. He caught it with his palm. A woman's face stared from the small square lit by flash. This woman, the one at the base of the cedar, but alive, walking on a downtown sidewalk last night, or last week, or an invented time, eyes turned toward the photographer, like she'd heard her name. On the bottom border, block letters in black marker, "Hello, again. Do you know her?" Nina asked gently. "No," Hale said. "But she knows me." Briggs loomed at his shoulder, reading as if the letters were in a language he hated. "I want that," he said, reaching for the copy of the tabloid. "You'll get it," Haley said, not letting go until the paper tore and the sheriff took the larger piece like a consolation prize. Briggs scowled and walked it to his car, already composing a statement in his head that would use phrases like cooperating with and no reason to believe. Hale looked at the Polaroid again. The woman's mouth was half open, her hair caught in the motion like water. Behind her, a storefront window reflected a shape that might have been the photographer or might have been a trick of flash. He flipped it over, a smear of blue ink, a number, 7 digits, local. On the left, a printed timestamp the camera had given as a party favor. 7 digits, Nina murmured. "No area code. Old habits," Hale said. "Or confidence, we'd know it." He slid the photo away and stared back at the trail, at the place where the trees met, and kept whatever they'd been given. The spiral on the cedar winked through the mist, like an eye closed to everything but itself. The jogger's voice rose from the pullout, hysterics returning in waves. The radios crackled. The rain did the only job it knew how to do. Hale imagined Leah at her kitchen table with the shoebox and the notebook and the camera that might hold a piece of the story. He imagined the killer in a room somewhere, lights off, television on mute, watching footage not as evidence but as a film, a work in progress, a cut to be improved. He slid behind the wheel, put the Polaroid on the dash where he could catch it with the corner of his eye. He dialed the 7 digits with a thumb that didn't quite belong to him. It rang once, twice, 3 times. A click. No voice, just the low rush of the creek, as if the phone itself lived out there in the trees. Then a breath, deliberate, borrowed from a different body. "Hale," a voice said, distorted not by electronics but by intention. It came to the second act. "Who is she?" he asked. "A local," the voice said. "A volunteer. She liked to help. This town breeds helpers. You understand that." "Why me?" "Oh," the voice said, and Hale heard the smile attached to the word. "Why not?" The line went dead. The crick kept talking on the other side of the woods, and the spiral on the cedar didn't have to say anything at all. Hale lowered the phone, and the world slid into a smaller frame inside his head, the box on Leah's table, the initials in Rachel's notebook, the foundation office, the church, the cabin with the carved angels, the estate on the ridge. Blood didn't just spill. It traveled. It made maps. Marcus Nina's hand was on the doorframe, knuckles white. "You hear that, right?" "I heard it," he said. "And I think I know where I have to go next." "Where?" she asked. He started the engine. The Polaroid rattled against the dash like a new heartbeat. His eyes flicked to the rear view. The trailhead sat empty in the reflection. No faces, no movement, just a brightness where the clearing would be. "Ashwood doesn't keep its secrets in the woods," he said. "It keeps them behind desks." He pulled onto the road, wipers slapping. Behind them, the scene sealed itself the way the earth does, taking in what it must. Ahead, the town waited, the steeple fixed, the smokestacks bored with their own smoke. The second body rode with them, even as it stayed behind in the rain, a message addressed to one man with the postage paid in old sins. At the first red light, Hale's phone vibrated, a text from unknown. No words, just a photo. His porch. Last night, the necklace exactly where he'd found it. On the bottom corner, the same marked script, "Your move." Hale stared until the light turned green, and the car behind him honked, as if that sound could move anything at all. He closed the message, slipped the phone face down. The act had started, and whoever had written the first line expected him to remember all of his lines, including the one he'd tried hardest to forget. Chapter 5. The Game. The storm broke sometime past midnight, but Marcus Hale couldn't sleep. He sat in the dark of his living room, bourbon untouched on the table, Rachel Whitman's shoebox of secrets beside it. The rain had left the world washed raw. The street outside gleamed under the streetlights, slick as wet glass. Every shadow looked inhabited. Every silence felt like a countdown. The Polaroid from the second victim leaned against the lamp, her eyes frozen mid-blink, her mouth about to form a word she never got to say. Beneath it, the typed tabloid clipping from New York. Both were messages, and Hale was starting to understand what kind of man wrote this script. Not a butcher, not a brawler, a storyteller, someone who believed murder was language. And Hale, he wasn't just an investigator anymore. He was a character. The laptop on his coffee table chimed. Hale froze. He hadn't left it on. The screen flared to life, a glow carving the dark. His desktop filled with a black background and white text, letters appearing one by one, as if typed by an invisible hand. H-E-L-L-O, M-A-R-S-E-Hus. His pulse thudded in his throat. He glanced at the router, at the cords, disconnected, airplane mode, and yet the cursor blinked, like a heartbeat. You're a good audience, better than New York. I want to play. Hale's fingers hovered over the keyboard, then landed heavy on the keys. What do you want? The reply came instantly. To teach you, to make you remember. I'll give you puzzles. You like puzzles. Lines of text filled the screen like a flood. A series of addresses, dates, coordinates, some crossed out, some circled in ASCII characters, and at the bottom, tomorrow night, Ashwood Sawmill, midnight, come alone, or the next body is yours. The cursor blinked twice, then the screen went black. The laptop powered down with a final, smug hum. Hale sat in the silence until his own reflection stared back from the glassy black screen, tired, unshaven, older than the man who'd once believed in clean victories. The bourbon stayed untouched. The next morning, Sheriff Briggs acted like nothing had changed. He held a press conference outside the courthouse, his voice booming with borrowed confidence. Last night's tragic discovery is an isolated incident. The Ashwood Sheriff's Department is following all leads. We want to assure our citizens that they are safe. We urge you to avoid rumors and speculation. Reporters nodded dutifully, their pens already spinning the angle Briggs wanted. Nina Park stood near the back, jaw clenched, eyes flicking toward Hale. She hadn't been told about the laptop, not yet. Afterward, in the parking lot, Briggs cornered Hale. You keep digging where I told you not to dig, he said, voice low enough to hide in the wind. Now we got vultures swarming. You don't run this department, city boy. I do. Hal stared at him, then run it. Because someone else is writing headlines faster than you can burn them. Briggs' jaw clenched, but he turned away, waving at the cameras like an actor leaving a stage. By evening, Hale drove the back roads until the sawmill rose in the distance hulking timber buildings, most of them dark, their windows boarded, machinery rusting under tarps. The mill had been Ashwood's blood once, decades ago. Now it was just bones. The gates sagged open. Hale killed his headlights and rolled inside, gravel crunching under his tires like teeth. He parked behind a storage shed, slipped out with his gun drawn. The place smelled of damp wood and oil. The silence wasn't empty. It was loaded, like the moment before a gunshot. He followed the path between warehouses, every footstep echoing louder than it should. His flashlight caught rusted saw blades leaning against a wall, their teeth orange but still sharp. And then light, a faint glow pulsing from the main office, spilling through a cracked door. Hale approached, gun raised. He nudged the door open with the barrel. Inside, a laptop sat on the desk, screen glowing against the dark. A single line of text filled the display. Welcome, Marcus. He stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind him. Locks clattered. Hale spun, gun up, but the shadows held nothing. The laptop chimed. More text appeared. You brought a gun. Of course you did, but bullets don't solve stories. Hale's pulse thundered. What do you want from me? He muttered. The screen answered. Confession. The laptop speakers crackled, and a voice filled the room, his voice. I tampered with the evidence. I planted what wasn't there. I let an innocent man hang for it. It was him, word for word, in his own cadence. A recording that shouldn't exist. Hale's breath caught that night in New York, the interrogation room. The accusations. The career that collapsed under headlines. He had never confessed. He'd denied. He'd fought. Yet here was his voice, twisted into guilt. The speakers hissed again. Another line of text appeared. The truth is flexible, and yours is a tool. The laptop shut off. Darkness swallowed the room. A faint scuffle of footsteps echoed from above in the office catwalk. Hale darted to the stairs, taking them two at a time, gun steady. The metal rattled under his boots. At the top he swept the beam of his flashlight across the walkway. Empty. Only dust, abandoned crates, and silence. Then something clattered below, his own car alarm shrieking to life in the distance. A distraction. By the time he reached the ground floor and bolted outside, the sawmill yard was empty again. No figures, no footsteps, just the echo of the alarm bouncing off corrugated walls. On his windshield, under the wipers, a Polaroid flapped in the night breeze. He yanked it free. Another photo. This one showed Nina Park, standing in front of the diner that morning, coffee in hand, eyes tired but alive. On the bottom margin, written in thick black marker, "She'll be next if you lie to her." Hale's grip tightened until the photo bent. He looked around, scanning the shadows, but the killer was gone. The sawmill loomed silent, satisfied. The message was clear. This wasn't just an investigation anymore. This was a game, a story. And the killer had just promoted Nina to leading role. Chapter 6. Corruption in Ashwood. By morning, the sawmill's echo felt like it had lodged somewhere behind Marcus Hale's eyes. He slept 2 hours and woke to the same sentence. She'll be next if you lie to her. The Polaroid of Nina Park on his dashboard had warmed under the sun and bent at the corners, a relic of a threat he couldn't afford to ignore. So he didn't. He told her everything. They met at the station's backlot, away from the windows where Sheriff Briggs liked to stand with a coffee and pretend the world was manageable. Nina leaned against Hale's Charger, arms crossed, hair jammed under a cap, breath fogging in the cold. "You're telling me," she said slowly after he got through the laptop, the hacker's letters, the sawmill, the voice from the darkness, "that someone broke into your computer, staged a theater in an abandoned mill, and then warned me about your honesty like he's my relationship counselor." "That about sums it up," Hale said. "And you decided the best way to keep me safe is to actually be honest." He met her eyes. "It's the only demand he made that I can stomach." Nina studied his face for the lie that wasn't there, then nodded once. "Okay, then we go honest on everything else too. No more half warrants, no more waits for permission that won't come. We find out why Rachel had money she couldn't afford and a camera she didn't normally carry. We find out what the Hollis Foundation funds when no one's looking. Public records," Hale said. Alma Nina pushed off the car. "Let's go wake the library." Alma Reyes wore a cardigan the color of a bruise and a look that said she'd been expecting them. She led them into the back room, a narrow space with a metal filing cabinet that sounded like an old man's sigh every time a drawer opened. On the table, she set a stack of printouts and a laptop. "Bless the IRS for making the rich write things down," Alma said, tapping a Form 990. "Hollis Foundation, -tax-exempt, charitable, very proud of its ballet of benevolence. Here's what they want us to see." Hal flipped through the pages. Names and numbers marched in columns. Grants to after-school programs, literacy initiatives, a scholarship fund, legitimate, loud, but tucked between them. Small disbursements, 2 blandly named entities. North Fork Community Outreach, St. Cyprian Housing, Ashwood Renewal Collaborative, all with the same P.O. box. "That box belongs to the foundation," Alma said, "or to someone who thinks the foundation is a convenient address." And she pulled a ledger she'd made herself, columns drawn by hand, entries from the town clerk's procurement site, and council minutes. "Look here. Councilman David Kendrick votes yes on a rezoning ordinance on River Flats. 6 months later, Ashwood Renewal Collaborative gets a pilot grant for urban revitalization. River Flats gets purchased by Hollis Timbers development arm through a shell company. You don't need a priest to find the sin in that." Nina leaned in. "How long has this been going on?" "Long enough it became habit," Alma said. "And habit makes people brave enough to think they'll never get caught." Hale found a line item that froze him. "Rachel would have seen these," Nina said. "She volunteered at the church and dealt with the foundation. She'd recognize St. Cyprian isn't a thing here. She also had unexplained cash deposits," Hale said. 2 weeks before her murder." "Stipend?" Nina asked. "Hush money," Alma countered. "Or bait." Hale looked at the column of small grants again. "We need to see who processes these, who signs, who moves the wires." "Kendrick's office," Alma said, "and Margaret Hollis's signature on the annual summaries." "Think the sheriff will give us a warrant for the foundation's servers?" Nina asked, and she already knew the answer. Hale closed the folder. "Let's go ask him anyway." Walt Briggs didn't bother to sit down. He listened to Hale sketch the flow of money, like a man hearing a ghost story, and deeply annoyed, unconvinced, vaguely embarrassed. "A warrant on the foundation," he said. "You want me to kick down the door of the one thing keeping this town held together with duct tape and gratitude?" "They're laundering money through fake charities," Hale said. "They profit off votes they buy with donations. They get a tax break to give. And now people are dying who circled their names in notebooks." Briggs rolled a quarter across his knuckles and made it look like a point. "People are dying because some psycho is getting his rocks off. Rich people do not carve spirals in trees. Rich people hire people, Nina said. Do you two hear yourselves? You imagine criminals with cufflinks because you watch television. Briggs snapped. We are not making enemies we can't afford to have. We don't alienate donors in a panic. We do police work. This is police work, Hale said. Follow the money, Walt. It's not a slogan. It's the only map that doesn't lie. Briggs slammed his palm against the desk, a habit that had replaced thinking. No, you want a warrant. Get me probable cause that isn't a librarian's scrapbook. Until then, you're off this foundation angle. Focus on the woods. Find your loner. Interview your weirdo. Hell, arrest Oliver Grant for littering if it makes you feel productive. What about the second victim's ID? Nina asked, jaw tight. We have a name yet. Briggs shuffled a paper without looking at it. Marla Dane, local, volunteered at the pantry. Same as the first girl. Rachel and Marla both worked in spaces tied to Hollis money, Hallie said. That's a pattern, Walt. It doesn't care about your fundraising breakfast. Get out of my office, Briggs said. Quieter, more dangerous, both of you. And Hale, if I find out you've been playing cowboy with my department's reputation, I'll hang your badge on the courthouse steps. Hale didn't say what he was thinking. He walked out, Nina stealing one last glare for the corner of Briggs' office where a photo of him shaking Margaret Hollis' hand sat framed and dust-free. Outside, the winter sun had a brittle shine. Nina kicked a pebble across the lot. You still want to play this straight? We play it smarter, Hale said. We make them show us themselves. How we talk to Father Cole, he said. Ask him about St. Cyprian. Nina snorted. You think a priest is going to help you nail a donor and a city councilman? He can't even tell you what someone said in a confessional. Confessionals aren't the only rooms priests sit in, Hale said. He runs a pantry. He sees grant checks arrive. He knows who's proud to pose with giant cardboard donations and who tells him to keep their name off the bulletin. Nina chewed on that and then sighed. All right. Father time it is. They found Father Gabriel Cole in the fellowship hall, sleeves rolled, apron dusted with flour as he guided a group of volunteers through kneading dough. The church air smelled like yeast and coffee, a living smell. He dismissed the volunteers gently and led Hale and Nina into his small office. Detective, he said. Deputy Park, I assume you didn't come for bread. Hallie set Alma's printouts on the desk. Father Cole glanced at the saint's name like it had touched an old bruise. St. Cyprian Housing, Hale asked. Father Cole let out a slow breath. I thought it was a joke when I saw it the first time. I even told Mr. Kendrick it was a poor choice of name for a charity meant to keep people off the street. He smiled that smile of his and said not everyone had my education in hagiography. You think it's real? Nina asked. I think it's a P.O. box, Father Cole said. I think the checks come from Hollis, pass through Kendrick's office, and then disappear. I asked too many questions once. Our pantry's grant got delayed. The next day, a parishioner who works at City Hall told me gently that Ashwood expects gratitude more than curiosity. He looked at Hale. Rachel asked about it too. She asked me, and I told her to be careful. She laughed. She said careful was for people who could live with themselves. How? You told us before she felt watched. Hale said, you didn't say by whom. Because she didn't say, Father Cole replied, eyes clouding. And because the last time I thought I recognized a wolf in sheep's clothing, I was wrong, and a man lost his job. I've been trying to pay down the interest on that mistake ever since. Did anyone ever confess to you about the woods? Nina asked. Careful, violating nothing in letter and everything in spirit. Father Cole considered, then shook his head. Not the way you imagine, but grief talks, guilt leaks. Once, years ago, someone sat across from me and described sin like a stage direction. He said he preferred a second act because first acts have too much hope. He said hope is messy. He rubbed his jaw. When the news said your victim was found at Silver Creek, I remembered his phrase. Second act, it meant something to him. The structure. He spoke like a director. Hale felt the chill then of the phone call in the woods, the voice that had welcomed him to the second act. Did you recognize him? He asked. In the abstract, Father Cole said. In the concrete, it was dark. I've made peace with what I can carry and what I can't. I wish I could be more. You've been enough, Hale said, and meant it. When they left, Nina exhaled hard. A priest who thinks in metaphors and a sheriff who thinks in mailers, she said. I picked the wrong career if what I wanted was straight lines. We have enough to hurt them, Hale said. Not enough to put them in cuffs. Yet he didn't say what else Father Cole had given him. Not a name, but a vector. Hope is messy. This killer liked control too much to believe in hope, but he believed in acts. And that meant timing and an audience. By mid-afternoon, the Foundation's downtown office looked painfully normal. A receptionist arranging pens, a framed photo of Margaret Hollis receiving a community award, a poster about River Flats revitalization featuring smiling, diverse families pasted onto a stock image of a playground. "Mr. Kendrick is in meetings," the receptionist said, and smiled the way people smile before they lie. "Would you like to leave a card?" Hale set his badge on the glass. "We'll wait." They waited. 15 minutes turned into 30, then 55. Nina scrolled headlines on her phone, then stopped. "Huh," she said. "What?" "River Flats was rezoned again last week. No public comment session. Emergency vote. Passed 4-1. Kendrick sponsored. And the one nay. Councilwoman Ortiz," Nina said, "who's conveniently on a 2-week family trip, according to her socials." The door to Kendrick's office finally opened. He stood there, tie askew like a man who arranged his disorder. "Detective," he said, "Deputy Park, to what do I owe this honor on a busy day?" "We have questions about St. Cyprian housing," Hale said. "I'm sure you do," Kendrick said lightly. "It's a wonderful initiative. We've partnered with several local." "It's a mailbox," Nina cut in, "at the UPS store across from Millie's Diner." "Ah," Kendrick said, as if they'd caught him at hiding candy. "We used a third-party mail service for some of our restricted grants to protect client privacy. Domestic violence survivors, undocumented families. Surely you wouldn't want their locations in public filings." "Then why is the check endorsed by a shell that traces back to your consulting firm?" Hale asked. He slid a photocopy across the desk one Alma had pulled from the county's digitized records. Kendrick's eyes moved, and for a split second the charm cracked and something reptilian looked out. "Because," Kendrick said, smile stiffening, "the modern non-profit world is complicated. We hire vendors. We leverage expertise. We help people. You're waving paper around because you can't find a monster in the trees. Detective, don't make one in my office." "Where were you the night Rachel Whitman was killed?" Hale asked. Kendrick's eyebrows twitched. "At home, with my wife, watching a documentary about, what was it, national parks." He chuckled. "We are that boring." "And the night Marla Dane died?" "A council dinner," Kendrick said. "The mayor can confirm. So can Margaret Hollis. We toasted the success of River Flats." Nina's voice went soft, dangerous. "Would Margaret also confirm the $25,000 to St. Cyprian?" "She doesn't get into the weeds," Kendrick said. "That's why she has me." "Lucky you," Hale said. Kendrick's smile went full politician again. "Unless you have a warrant, this meeting is over." On the way out, they passed a side office with the door ajar. Inside, a woman at a computer made eye contact with Hale for a fraction of a second and then dropped her gaze. Her nameplate read Erinvale Finance. She had the look of someone who knew where the digital bones were buried and had stopped sleeping because of it. Back on the sidewalk, Nina touched her sleeve, and a business card appeared in Hale's hand like a magic trick. Erinvale was printed in small, brisk letters. "Pocket it," Nina said. "It was sitting on the copier. She left it there for us. Or wants to believe she did." Hale slid the card into his wallet, the way you slide a valuable into a false bottom. "We don't call from our phones. I've got a prepaid in my glove box," Nina said. "For when I decide I like my job less than the truth." They separated to keep eyes off their patterns. Hale walked 3 blocks, bought a cup of coffee he didn't want, and waited on a bench under a tree that had forgotten summer. The prepaid number Nina sent buzzed in. He dialed Erinvale. She answered on the first ring, whisper microscopic. "Don't say my name." "Okay," Hale said. "I won't." "You can't come here," she said. "You can't email me. If I'm seen talking to you, I don't get fired, I get ground into the floor. Do you understand?" "Yes, I have files," she said. "They're not bombs. They're worse. They look boring. They're boring in a way that makes evil safe. But if you tie them to the council votes and the donations and the rezones, you'll see it." "Where?" "Tonight," she said after a breath that sounded like it hurt. "Riverside Overlook. 9 o'clock. Park at the lower lot and walk up. Don't bring anyone." Hale looked at the Polaroid of Nina in his mind like it was real, raised his eyes to the street, and altered the script. "I'm bringing someone," he said. "You'll be safer if I do." Silence. Then make sure they don't write reports." "She doesn't," Hale said. Erin disconnected without goodbye. When he called Nina to relay, she was already ahead of him. "I'll get there first," she said. "If someone's watching you, I'd rather they count the wrong heads." "Nina," he started. "I'll text when I see her," she said. "If I don't text, you don't come blind. You come loud." "Nina, honesty, remember," she said, and hung up. Hale spent the next 3 hours failing at stillness. He killed time at the diner and devoured a sandwich he didn't taste, while Millie refilled his coffee as if she could pour calm. He tried Briggs one more time for a paper trail and got stone. He drove past the church, watched Father Cole lock the side door, and stand for a moment in the courtyard with his head tipped back, like a man receiving rain that wasn't there. He pulled into the lot below Riverside Overlook at 8:52 and turned off his lights. The river, far below, moved like a dark animal between rocks. The overlook was a wooden platform with benches and a sign explaining the salmon run to tourists who never came. A trail wound up through firs, damp and smelling of iron. Hale took it on foot, boots whispering, breath measured. His phone vibrated at 9:03. A text from Nina, with her 10 minutes, no punctuation. The kind of message that was trying hard not to attract attention even from itself. The minutes thickened. Hale moved slower, every step a question. The platform came into view through the trees, empty at first glance. Then his eyes adjusted, and he saw the shape against the rail, turned to the river, still in a way that had nothing to do with patience. "Nina," he called softly. No answer. The sound of water did not change. He moved forward, gun lowered but ready. The figure by the rail was a woman. Her dark hair had come loose from a bun, strands caught against her cheek. A scarf was knotted at her throat. He reached her, and the world inside him shifted into that tight, bright place where sensation becomes inventory. Not Nina. Erin Vale stared past him with eyes that had learned their last thing. Her mouth was parted. The knot at her neck was the same simple death. In her hand, a flash drive glinted, the metal warm from a heat that had left. On the planks beside her boots, a white envelope. In the carved post of the overlook's railing, fresh gouges shone. Spiral, jagged lines. The author had signed the view. Hale swallowed whatever tried to claw up his throat and reached for the flash drive with fingers that wanted to shake. He bagged it, then the envelope. He slit it open and pulled out a single sheet. One sentence in the same 12-point font as before. "She lied to you first." Footsteps behind him. He spun, heart punching, gun up. Nina, pale in the half-light, breath tearing. She took in the scene in a single scan and went still. "He texted me," she said, voice thin, from her phone. "Said she was early, said to come alone. I was 20 yards down the trail when I saw a shadow move. Then nothing. I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Hale closed his eyes, opened them. The river moved. The night didn't care. Sirens rose, distant, called by a jogger with good timing or a neighbor with better ears. Their wail floated up the gorge, thin and useless. Hale tucked the sheet back into the envelope and looked at the fresh cut in the wood, the angle of the gouge. "Walt will call this a copycat too," Nina said, disgust rolling her syllables. "He'll say she died because she got herself in the way. He'll say we should have stayed on the trails he allowed. He'll say a lot," Hale murmured. They waited with Erin for the world to arrive. Flashes colored the trees. Deputies clattered up the path, faces open and then closing like doors when they understood. Sheriff Briggs's shape lurched out of the blue, his mouth moving before his feet stopped. "What the hell did you?" he began, then saw the symbol and cut himself off like a wire had snapped. "God damn it." He looked at Hale as if the blame would be enough protein to live on. Hale stared back like a man who had stopped recognizing the utility of blame. They gave statements that were facts without meaning. They daisy-chained the scene in tape. The coroner came and took a citizen who had tried to help and failed by trusting breathing the wrong air. When the crowd rolled down the hill again with its sadness packed away in boxes, Hale and Nina remained on the platform with the wet wood and the smell of the river. The night tried to become night again. Nina's phone buzzed. She pulled it out like a viper. A text from an unknown number. The thread new, uninfected by previous threats. It read, simply, "Check your car." She turned to Hale, face emptied. "That's mine," she said. "It's to me." They moved down the path together, slow and then faster. Adrenaline looking for something to spend itself on. The lower lot looked the same from 50 yards, rows of vehicles glistening, a street lamp humming. As they drew closer, they saw Nina's cruiser, parked where she'd left it, a moth circling the light. Her driver's side window was down an inch. On the roof, centered and precise, sat a small object, a dashcam unit, wires clipped, lens staring at the sky like a dead eye. Next to it, a Polaroid held in place by a strip of blue painter's tape. Nina tore it free, with a gentleness that meant she wanted to break it. She turned it to the light. The photo showed the inside of her apartment, her couch, her coffee table. On it, a single key and her spare badge. On the bottom margin, block letters, "Goodbyes are better when you're home." Nina's throat worked. "Marcus," she said, and it was not a plea so much as an acknowledgement of something arriving. Hale looked into the dark beyond the lot. He looked at the trees that had been nice enough to be trees. He looked at the road back to town, and the street where he lived, and the church with yeast rising in bowls, and the library with boxes of truth, and he understood the shape of the second act, as designed by someone who hated hope. "We're not splitting up," he said. "I wasn't planning on it," Nina said, and tried on a smile that didn't fit. They drove in tandem, his Charger leading, her cruiser behind, through a town that pretended to sleep. Nina's place was on Birch, second floor, a balcony with a view of the laundromat's neon. They climbed the stairs together, guns ready. The door was locked. Nina slid the key from her pocket and stood a beat with it in the air. "Ready?" she asked. "No," Hale said, and that was the truth he could offer. She turned the key. The door swung open on a room arranged for a photograph. Couch neat, coffee table clear. A single key and a spare badge laid gently in the center like ritual objects. A candle burned on the counter, scent clean and cheap, making the hair on Hale's arms lift. Across the room, on the far wall, fresh gouges dragged themselves into a spiral. Below it, a message in scrawled marker that bled into the paint. "Tell the truth." Something creaked down the hall. Nina Hale started, but she was already moving, gun up, breath measured and wrong. They reached the bedroom door together. It was ajar. Nina pushed it with the toe of her boot, slow. The room beyond was dark, but for a sliver of streetlight. On the bed, arranged with a care that was murderous, lay Nina Park, not the woman beside him. This was a photograph, large, printed, cheap and grainy, taped to the sheets. Her eyes were closed in it, asleep, a candid from a night she believed in safety. The real Nina inhaled sharply at the violation. On the nightstand, a phone buzzed to life on its own. Its screen lit a countdown in white digits. 10, 9, 8. Hale grabbed it and flipped it, looking for wires he knew wouldn't be there. "Move," he said. "Out." They were halfway down the hall when the phone hit zero and sang a simple tune, the first bars of a nursery rhyme. In the kitchen, the candle guttered and went out. In the living room, a red dot blinked on the ceiling laser. No, a camera's tiny recording light waking up. Hallie swore, grabbed the coffee table, flipped it, then something in the bedroom clacked, a small mechanism engaging. They reached the front door as a shower of glitter burst from the ceiling vent, and drifted down in a sparkling rain that stuck to their hair, their coats, their faces. They stood on the landing, breathing hard, dusted in craft store stardust. The hallway smelled of whatever chemicals made glitter refuse to die. From inside, the nursery rhyme tune repeated and faded. Nina wiped her cheek with the back of her wrist. The glitter stuck and shone. She laughed once, hard and broken. "He wants us to look ridiculous," she said. "He wants the camera to catch us shiny and stupid. He wants you off balance," Hale said. "So the next thing looks like it came from you." They stared into the apartment where an echo of Nina's life had been staged. The neighbors' TVs murmured. Somewhere a dog barked at nothing that mattered. Hale felt the nausea he got on boats. By the time they called it in, by the time the first cruiser nosed onto Birch with its lights off and its urgency hiding under doctrine, by the time Sheriff Briggs stood in the doorway and took in the glitter with a snarl that meant the press would dine well, Hale understood the chapter's price. He looked at Nina under the streetlight as she blinked glitter out of her lashes and tried to reassemble a posture. He looked at the Polaroid in her hand that wanted her home, and the spiral on her wall that wanted her gone, and he understood that the story had rewritten their schedule, because when the call came through the radio flat, astonished, small, it wasn't for Birch, it was for a patrol car found 2 miles outside town. Engine idling, driver's door open, no officer in sight. Unit number As Briggs's eyes cut to her, and then to Hale. The world constricted. Nina stared at the radio like it had spoken a different language. "I left it at the Overlook," she said, voice thin. "We drove mine home." The dispatcher swallowed a sob into the mic. There's a note on the seat," she said, "addressed to Detective Hale." And like that, the author turned the page. Chapter 7. The Disappeared. The night cracked open with the dispatcher's voice. Note on the seat, addressed to Detective Hale. Marcus Hale stood in Nina Park's glitter-strewn apartment, every surface catching the light like a crime scene dressed for carnival. The absurd shimmer only sharpened the blade of the words. A patrol car abandoned. A note with his name. Another chapter in someone else's book. Briggs barked orders into his radio, already painting the narrative. Perimeter. Lockdown County 7 and 9. Nobody in, nobody out. He jabbed a finger at Hale. "Don't contaminate this any more than you already have. Stay put until I say otherwise." But Hale was already moving. Nina caught his arm before the stairwell. "Marcus, if this is another trap, it's all a trap," Hale said. "That's the point. The only way to win is not to stop walking into them." She stared at him, glitter clinging to the corners of her eyes like reluctant tears, then nodded. "Then let's walk." The patrol car sat off Mill Creek Road, hazard lights pulsing slow orange, casting the trees in sickly rhythm. Deputies stood around it like kids at a campfire they didn't want to admit scared them. Hale pushed through before Briggs could leash him. The driver's door yawned open, interior dome light buzzing faintly. The seat was empty but still warm. The smell of pine and something metallic hung in the air. On the dash, a white envelope. His name again. Hale, thick black marker strokes. He pulled gloves from his pocket, slid the envelope into a bag, opened it carefully. Inside, a single Polaroid. A man in uniform sat slumped against a wall, eyes closed, mouth gagged with duct tape. Behind him, faint but unmistakable, the stained glass windows of Our Lady of the Pines Church, scrawled beneath the image. "One of your own." Nina swore softly. "Which deputy?" The face came into focus under the harsh dome light. Mid-20s buzzcut, Ernest Hale recognized him from the station coffee pot. "Deputy Chris Heller. Last seen on shift 2 hours ago," Hale muttered. "Now a hostage." Briggs arrived at his shoulder, puffing. "What is it?" Hale turned the photo so only Nina could see. "Nothing you can help with," he said, and pocketed it before Briggs could snatch it. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Don't you dare play me, Hale." "You've been playing yourself," Hale said, voice low enough that only Briggs caught it. "And now someone else is pulling your strings." They drove in silence to the church. Father Gabriel Cole was still awake, his office light glowing through stained glass like a muted fire. He opened the side door with a tired expression that collapsed when Hale showed him the photo. "Dear God," Cole whispered. He pressed fingers to his collar, as though it might keep his breath steady. "That's the sacristy. No one should have access after hours." "Keys?" Hale asked. "I have one. The bishop has one. Walt has one. For emergencies." Briggs bristled. "Are you accusing?" "Not now," Hale snapped. "Where's the sacristy?" Cole led them through dim corridors that smelled of wax and damp stone. The air was too still, too staged. Hale's instincts screamed theater again, an audience waiting for actors to stumble onto their marks. They reached the sacristy door. It stood ajar, lock splintered. Inside, vestments hung like ghosts on hooks. Chalices glimmered faintly on shelves. And in the corner, Chris, Nina whispered, Deputy Heller, sat bound to a chair, duct tape over his mouth, wrists tied behind him. His chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm. Alive. Hale swept the room, gun raised, but no other presence stirred. He cut the tape from Heller's mouth. "Trap." Heller gasped, eyes wild. He said, "To give you this." His throat worked, and he spat a crumpled piece of paper from where it had been shoved between cheek and gum. Helly smoothed it open. One line, typed again in that same neat font. "Sunday service. Bring them all. Third act." Below it, a date. "This coming Sunday. 3 days away." Cole crossed himself. "What does it mean?" "It means," Hale said, staring at the paper until the words burned behind his eyes, "the killer just scheduled his finale, and he wants an audience bigger than us." They got Heller to the hospital. No injuries beyond bruised wrists, dehydration, and a terror that would live under his skin for the rest of his life. Hale and Nina sat in the hallway outside his room, fluorescent lights buzzing, the world trying to resume its banality. "He could have killed him," Nina said, "but didn't," Hale answered, "because Chris isn't part of the story." He's just the courier. Nina tilted her head back against the wall, eyes closed. Sunday service. That's when the whole town packs the pews. He wants an audience, Marcus. He wants a stage. And we're going to be standing right there when the curtain goes up. Hale's hand tightened around the note. His mind traced Alma's old clippings, Rachel's notebook, Erin Vale's corpse by the overlook, the sawmill trap, Nina's invaded home, all converging, all pointing to Ashwood's heart. This isn't about hiding anymore, Haley said. It's about spectacle. And spectacle means casualties. He nodded. Unless we turn the stage lights on him first. Nina's eyes opened, sharp and alive despite exhaustion. Then we have 3 days to pull the mask off. 3 days before he writes the ending for us. The hospital hallway stretched silent before them, fluorescent glow buzzing like a countdown. And somewhere in Ashwood, the killer was already rehearsing. Chapter 8. Into the Woods. 3 days until Sunday's service. 3 days until whatever the killer meant by third act. The town kept moving like a wind-up toy school buses, exhaling steam at corners. The diner clinking silverware, the mill's silent bones, watching from the ridge butt. Everything felt fractionally out of sync, as if Ashwood had slipped a gear and no one wanted to admit the new noise. Marcus Hale didn't sleep. He split the hours into errands of necessity and stubbornness. First stop, Alma's library, back room, door locked, blinds drawn. On the table, the flash drive he'd taken from Erin Vale's hand at the overlook lay like a relic that still radiated heat. Air-gapped machine, Alma said, patting a battered laptop like an old dog. I keep it offline for when the internet tries to make a fool of me. Internet or people? Hale asked. Same difference some days. Alma slid on readers and nodded at the chair. Let's see what she died to give you. Hale plugged the drive in. No autoroon tricks. No fireworks. Just folders named like any junior analyst's desk. Reports, drafts, receipts, _OLD. He opened receipts first, PDFs, scans, line items that at first read like a charity's normal errands printing, event rentals, AV equipment. Then the shape inside them took focus. A recurring vendor for stage glitter, specialty confetti, a purchase order for 10 disposable cameras in a world where every phone already had one. A cash invoice for timer modules custom chime. A trail cam brand he recognized from Silver Creek. Props, Alma whispered. He's buying props with philanthropy money. Hale clicked into reports and found spreadsheets. The columns were neat, to the point of obsession. Date, disbursement, project, internal memo. One memo field, Reed River Flats Pilot Optics. Another, St. Cyprian, off books. The sums were small enough to hide under the noise of a wealthy foundation's generosity. The regularity was what mattered. It made a pattern you could tap with your finger. Open _OLD, Alma said softly. Inside sat a folder marked Arch. Within it, a single video file. Timestamp from a year ago. The thumbnail showed a dim room, black cloth in the background. Hallied, static, then motion. A fixed camera watching a table. Hands entered the frame gloved, efficient laying out objects as if prepping a ritual. White envelopes, a stack of fresh Polaroid film, a pair of shears, a coil of painter's tape, a small canister marked with a glitter brand. The hands moved with ease, not ceremony. At the edge of the frame, a forearm brushed the lamp and a sleeve rode back. Dark suit, crisp cuff, a thick ring on the middle finger, catching the light. Not a wedding band. A signet flat-faced, engraved with something he couldn't read here. The camera wobbled as someone adjusted it. A face drifted into the left third of frame and out again, blurred and clipped by the lens. Hale froze the picture, dragged the slider back, advanced one click at a time. The face never centered, but the voice did, off camera, casual and humming with command. Lighting's fine, the voice said. Male, mid-40s, educated, local vowels ironed out by too many rooms like committee chambers. Tape labels clean, no smudges. Keep the font. Hale's skin went cold. He'd heard that tone Dewtown business. Light, soothing, a self-compliment every time it said, we. He pictured the office downtown with framed ribbon cuttings and a receptionist who smiled like policy. He pictured a man who told him charity was complicated and that his job was to keep it boring. Rewind, Alma said. Too quiet. Hale did, zooming on the ring. The frame broke into pixels, but the bulk of the metal stayed unmistakable. A square face, beveled edges, a faint crest or initial. a ring men wore when they wanted their handshake to feel heavier. Alma touched the screen. "Kendrick," she said, and didn't make it a question. Hale's jaw clenched. "It's not proof." "No," Alma said. "It's an introduction." They looked at the screen a moment longer. The hands laid out one more item. Hale leaned closer. It wasn't a prop, it was a token. A crescent charm, the same shape Rachel Whitman had worn at her throat. The hands didn't caress it. They filed it, like a note in a drawer. Hale closed the laptop carefully, as if volume could wake the thing watching them. "Where's a 1-hour photo lab in this town?" "Drugstore on 4th, Alma said. "They never stopped developing film. The manager says the kids like retro." She winced at the word. He slid the disposable camera from Rachel's box across the table. "He stalked her," Alma said. "She stalked him back. Or she caught him by accident," Hale said. "Sometimes the truth photobombs you." Alma nodded toward the door. "Go. Bring me something so I know I am not collecting clippings for the sake of the ritual." The drugstore smelled like detergent and lemon. A teenager with a septum ring manned the photo counter, tapping on a monitor in a way that made time seem like a suggestion. "Got a roll for processing," Hale said, setting the camera down. 3 hours, the kid said. 60 minutes, Hallie said. "Emergency discount." The kid looked at the camera, then at Hallie, then at the badge. He let cats delight. 45, the kid amended, deciding to believe the world still had rules if you gave it a price. Hale killed the time by parking where he could see the front door and watching the town move like it didn't know its place in the program. At 41 minutes his phone buzzed, ready in blocky text that made him like the kid more. Back at the counter, the clerk slid an envelope across. Hale stepped into the pharmacy aisle and flipped through the stack of 4x6 prints, until the drumbeat under his ribs changed tempo. Rachel had a good eye when she remembered she had one. Half the roll was ordinary life. Leah on the couch, a church pantry shelf, a shot of Millie at the diner mid-eye roll. Then the camera had followed money. A framed photo of the Hollis Foundation's donor wall, a shot through glass of David Kendrick's office, him talking with a man whose reflection ate his face. Kendrick's hands in mid-gesture, signet ring fat and certain. A shot of the River Flats sign under a winter sky. A fluke flash captured a handoff in the hallway, an envelope, moving from Kendrick to a man in a work jacket, his cap pulled low. The Cap's logo caught the light. A private security firm that had sprung up in Ashwood the last year to protect sites the town couldn't afford cops to patrol. The next frame punched. Rachel had zoomed as much as a disposable could zoom on a wrist. The same signet ring, closer, the face engraved with a stylized K in a circle. Kendrick again, the same day, maybe the same hour. Proof? No. But the margins were shrinking. The last 2 photos made Hale's neck prickle. A door-marked, concrete block, cinder around the frame half submerged in ivy. Another of a trail sign, North Fork Cathedral Grove, 1.6 mi. It was dusk in the picture. A streetlight a block away had already come on. On the back of the print, in blue ballpoint, Rachel had written one word, voices. He dialed Nina before he reached the parking lot. "Cathedral Grove," he said, "North Fork Trail." Rachel was there, with her camera, and a door I don't recognize near it. Nina didn't ask for the rest. "I'll meet you in 10, she said. "Stay put." "Can't," he said. "If the door's still there, I want eyes on it before it grows legs." "Marcus, bring your backup," he said. "Or bring your stubborn. Either one." The North Fork Trail started at a gravel lot plastered with laminated notices about cougars and courteousness. The air smelled of fur and something deeper. A wet mineral scent like a cellar opened after a long absence. Hale took the path at a steady clip, breath forming white puffs. The prince, his boots laid in the mud filling with water behind him, until they looked like nothing had been there at all. Cathedral Grove wasn't a cathedral, not really, but the name fit. Old growth rose around a natural amphitheater of ferns and fallen logs, light thinning to a green hush that made voices feel like trespass. Hale stopped at the edge, letting the quiet calibrate him. There were remnants of recent occupation without the kindness of a camp. Scuffed ground, a few cigarette butts mashed into loam, a length of blue painter's tape fluttering from a branch like a tagged idea. He scanned for the door Rachel had found. Not here. The photo with the cinder blocks was a different angle, a different context. Close by though, he moved left, tracking the contour of the hill until the underbrush thinned. and the ground pitched up toward a service road that maintenance trucks used to reach the far ridge. There, ivy clawing at a concrete rectangle cut into earth. The door sat slightly ajar, padlock hanging snapped, the shackle sheared clean as if by bolt cutters with fresh teeth. The hair on Hale's forearms lifted. He didn't like basements that weren't referred to as basements. He liked doors even less when they whispered. He drew his gun and pushed the door with 2 fingers. It gave an inch, then more, until the smell met him. Not rot, paper, damp, metal that had been closed up with its thoughts too long. The stairwell led down 10 steps to packed earth. A bare bulb burned in a cage, the switch above staining the wall, black with the history of fingers. Hale's light threw the small chamber into relief. 4 paces by 5, plywood shelves set into 3 walls, a folding table against the 4th. On the shelves, bankers' boxes labeled with tidy Ashwood labels press, photos, mailers, supplies. On the table, a cutting mat, a paper trimmer, a thermal label printer, spools of tape. And above it all, carved into the back wall, the way you decarve a notch on a secret kept too long, the spiral intersected by jagged lines. Hale moved slow. The chamber wasn't a lair, it was a workshop, and the owner had taste for inventory. He lifted lids with gloved hands. Photos held contact sheets, Polaroids, and prints of places that made his stomach shrink. The corners of porches, backs of heads in pews, the silver of Nina's badge catching light on her coffee table. PRESS included clippings. Alma hadn't collected headlines about rezoning votes, philanthropic triumphs, a small piece from last spring where David Kendrick called Cathedral Grove sacred to Ashwood's health during a ribbon cutting for new trail signage. Mailers contained envelopes pre-addressed with typewritten labels, all with names of people who mattered to the town. The mayor, the council, Margaret Hollis, Father Cole. The typewriter sat under the table, its keys clean, its ribbon fresh. On the shelf, a perfume of receipts, glitter, timer modules, one-way mirror film. On the far right, a shoebox identical to Rachel's. Hale raised the lid, expecting more props, and found things that made conversation stop. Tokens in Ziplocs, each with a photo, each with sharp scrawl. RWMD EV, Rachel Whitman, Marla Dane, Erinvale. Rachel's bag held a crescent earring, missing its mate. Marla S. held the ticket stub from a movie she'd seen the week before she died. Erin's held a lanyard clipped from her office badge. Hale swallowed and looked up into the spiral carved above the table. He had the unpleasant certainty of being read. A sound behind him, the softest click, like a small thought locking into place. He turned and froze the beam on the doorway. A silhouette filled the frame, not huge, not small, composed, one hand empty, open, the other at his side, holding something slim. "Detective," the man said, and calm walked into the room ahead of him. "You made it between acts." David Kendrick stepped down into the light, like he'd practiced it. The suit was tailored and out of place in dirt. The signet ring winked at the bulb, a tiny stage light in miniature. His eyes were the same color as the clear-story windows in his office. When the sun hit, an expensive blue you could mistake for sincerity. Hale's gun didn't drop an inch. "You left your ring in too many photos," he said. "You should teach a class called How Not to Hide." Kendrick smiled, the kind of smile that had gotten budgets approved. "Everyone hides in Ashwood. I'm just the first one who decided to direct." "Why?" The word was too small for the work it needed to do. Hale set it on the table anyway. Kendrick glanced at the boxes like a man showing off a gallery. "Because stories are what move people, detective, not hearings, not reports, not Alma's brave little clippings, spectacle. You've seen it. New York taught you. If a lie is loud enough and beautiful enough, truth needs craft just to be heard over the music. So you carved women into your thesis," Hale said. Kendrick's mouth flattened, not offended so much as bored by the binary. "I carved symbols so this town would feel something again. Do you know what my mother said when Father Cole wanted new freezers for the pantry? She said, 'Ask the newspaper to run a photo. People only donate to what they can see. Everyone's comfortable here. Marcus May, I call you Marcus, and comfort is an amnesia. I'm a cure. You murdered Rachel Whitman, Marla Dane, and Erinvale." Hale said, "Cure sounds like a bad marketing word for rot." Kendrick tilted his head, as if listening for a cue. "Rachel wanted to matter. She stepped onto the stage. I didn't drag her. She chose the aisle seat and craned for the spotlight, and she looked beautiful in it. The second one, Marla, she was faithful. I gave her a better communion. And Erin, he sighed, genuine regret playing across his face like light. Erin was brilliant. But brilliant people think they can switch scripts mid-show. They forget why anyone came. Hale's trigger finger tightened the way a held breath tightens. You planned Sunday. The third act, Kendrick said, delighted he and Hale were finally talking the same language. Don't worry, I'm not crude. No bombs, no televangelist theatrics. Something clean, something the town will talk about for 30 years without deciding on a consensus. That's art. Your art ends tonight, Hale said. He kept his voice even. The room smelled of metal and damp, and Kendrick's cologne bergamot cedar, the kind of note men buy when they want you to believe they know a forest. You're under arrest. Kendrick didn't look at the gun. He looked at the spiral above it. Do you know what your problem is, Marcus? You still think you can pull a rope and bring the curtain down? Turn around, Hale said, hands on the wall. Kendrick lifted his empty hand. Of course. He turned, palmed the wall, head bowed like prayer. He sounded like he was smiling into the plaster. Though I should tell you, a thud behind Hale, air hissed. He pivoted, gun slicing the space, but the hit wasn't a hit. It was a pinprick at his neck, a sting like a wasp. He slapped his hand there, and his fingers came away with the feather of a dart, no, longer than a thumb, thin as a bad idea. He turned back. Kendrick hadn't moved. His other hand still hung at his side, holding the slim thing Hale had clocked too late, a pen-shaped dart gun, matte and lovely. That you didn't come alone, Kendrick finished. You came with your past, and your past is such rich material. Hale aimed and fired. The shot smacked the wall an inch from Kendrick's ear, plaster coughing dust. The second shot shook in his hand. He willed his arms to obey, his knees to remember their job. The room tilted, the bulb in its cage swinging slightly, making the boxes heave in an ocean he couldn't command. Relax, Kendrick said, and the word arranged itself in Hale's bloodstream without permission. It's a sedative, not a heavy dose, just enough to make you a receptive listener. Hale tried to take a step and found that the floor had moved farther away. He braced one hand on the table, the other still aiming, though the muzzle skated a little like it had forgotten the difference between threat and gesture. You picked Sunday, he heard himself say. The voice sounded like his through a door. Why the church? Because ashes want altars, Kendrick said. Amused, he had to explain. Because Father Cole believes hope is messy, and I believe hope is a set piece with one purpose, to keep people from noticing the wires. Because this town will keep the memory better if they can picture where to place the flowers. He crouched to meet Hale's eyes. Because you'll be there, and you are the only honest audience I've had. Footsteps scuffed outside the door, soft, careful, the currency of someone who had learned to tread between stories. Kendrick's head cocked, listening. He stood in one graceful motion, slid the dart gun into his jacket like a pen into a pocket, and backed toward the stair. You won't make it out, Hale managed, and the sentence tasted like bourbon left too long on a table. Kendrick looked up into the stairwell, the light behind him painting him clean. I will, he said. Because you one T-shoot through me if you can T-see what S behind. And because when you fall politely. A shadow crossed the doorway above Nina, or a deputy, or the town itself arriving too late, in the same way it always had. Hale raised the gun, found two of Kendrick's faces, tried to choose. 3 days, Kendrick said, and the number sounded like a clock that had learned its lines. Be ready to testify. He slipped through the door. The hinges whispered. Hal staggered, caught himself on the edge of the table, the shoebox of tokens skidding, the crescent charm clinking against its ziplock. He aimed at the doorway, and the bulb swung again, and the room took a step to the left that his balance didn't tee. The gun clattered to the floor. He went to his knees with it. He heard her then, a single word from the stairwell, sharp as a siren breaking. Marcus. Nina's voice, close. He tried to answer, and made a sound that wasn't language. The concrete breathed damp into his cheek. The last thing he saw before the light shuddered was the spiral on the wall, steady and pleased. Something thumped on the steps. A figure dropped into the doorway. Not Kendrick. Smaller. Alma, of all stubborn saints, with a flashlight gripped like a weapon. Found your car, she said, as if narrating an errand. Figured the only door in this county you'd open without me would be the wrong one. She glanced at the spiral and didn't flinch. Oh, Marcus. Boots hit behind her. Nina. gun up, breath knifing the cold air. She saw Hale, saw the boxes, saw the empty door Kendrick had left swinging. Assessed the distance like a math problem without a good answer. Where, she asked, the word ragged at the edges. Gone, Hale managed. Nina's jaw set. She turned to the stair, ready to chase a director through his own backstage. Don't, Alma said, catching her sleeve. Curtains dropped. He'll want an encore, and it gets meaner when the audience doesn't T-clap on time. Nina stood vibrating, rage and restraint punching each other in the ribs. The chamber ticked. The cage bulb buzzed. Damp settled. Hale's pulse argued with the sedative. From somewhere above, from the indifferent mouth of the woods, a phone chimed. A text, Nina. She lifted it, eyes moving, face emptying and filling at once. Unknown. Sunday, bring them all. The message pulsed. Then another arrived, from the same nowhere, and where something nice. Chapter 9. The final revelation. The sedative didn't drain clean. Marcus Hale carried it with him like an undertow for the next 48 hours. Sluggish reflexes, a mind that stalled just when he needed it to race. He hated himself for it, and he hated David Kendrick more for knowing it would happen. By Saturday night, the town buzzed with an edge Hale could taste. Flyers went up announcing an expanded Sunday service at Our Lady of the Pines, sponsored by the Hollis Foundation, a community celebration. They called it music, food, speeches, the kind of event where everyone was expected to show up if they wanted to be seen as good Ashwood citizens. This is it, Nina said, dropping the flyer on Hale's table. Glitter still clung to the seams of her jacket from her staged apartment. He's not even hiding anymore. He's buying his audience a ticket. Hale stared at the black spiral doodled in one corner of the flyer, subtle enough to look like a printer's smudge unless you knew what you were looking for. And they'll clap, because they think they're watching a fundraiser. No, Nina said, shaking her head. They'll clap because he'll make them. Because Kendrick doesn't care about hiding. He cares about directing. And Sunday is his finale. Hale's phone buzzed then. Unknown number. The same clipped font as always. You're invited. Front row. He turned the phone toward her. Nina read, swallowed, and muttered. He's daring you not to show. Hale almost laughed. Which means the only way to beat him is to be there. Sunday, 10:15 a.m. The church smelled of polish and incense, candles and perfume. Families filed in wearing their best coats. Children tugged on sleeves. Sheriff Briggs sat stiff in the front pew. Margaret Hollis beside him. Smile rehearsed. Councilman Kendrick moved through the aisles like a conductor tuning his orchestra. He stopped to shake hands, to pat shoulders, to whisper to Father Cole as though they were equals. Hale sat near the aisle with Nina at his side. Alma had tucked herself in the back row, notebook in her lap like armor. The choir hummed through warm-ups. Outside, patrol cars lined the block, deputies fidgeting. Briggs had insisted it was security. Hale knew it was camouflage. Every single person he needs to see is here. Nina whispered. Hollis Briggs, the whole council. Even the mayor. Like I said, Hale muttered. A stage. At 10:30 sharp, Kendrick mounted the pulpit. He didn't wear vestments. He wore his politician's suit, the signet ring gleaming under the stained glass, like it was designed for the role. He didn't raise his hands for silence. He didn't need to. The crowd hushed like a script had been followed. Friends, Kendrick began, voice smooth as varnish. We are gathered not just in worship, but in gratitude. Gratitude for a town that remembers what it means to stand together. Applause rippled. He let it crest and fade. Then his eyes found Hale, and for one breath too long, he held it. Hale felt the air constrict. Some of you, Kendrick continued, have lost loved ones this year. Tragedies that have shaken us. But tragedy, as the poets remind us, is not an end. It is an act. And today is the third act. The words struck like a hammer. People clapped anyway, not knowing, because Kendrick smiled, and they were trained to clap when he smiled. Beside Hale, Nina's knuckles whitened around her service pistol under her coat. He's going to do it now, she breathed. Then Kendrick reached beneath the pulpit. Hale rose instantly, heart in his throat. Deputies shifted. A murmur swept the congregation, but Kendrick didn't draw a gun. He drew a projector remote. Behind him, a white screen descended. A flicker, then images bloomed, grainy Polaroids, contact sheets, headlines. Rachel Whitman's necklace, Marla Dane's smile at the pantry, Erin Vale's lanyard, Hale's own apartment door carved with spirals. Even Nina's living room glittering like a crime scene joke. Gasps, whispers. Margaret Hollis sat frozen. Father Cole lowered his head into his hands. "This," Kendrick said, voice rising with rhythm, "is Ashwood's truth. A truth you were too timid to name. A truth Detective Marcus Hale thought he could smother, as he smothered the truth in New York." Hale froze. His throat dried to ash. On screen now, a doctored recording, his voice spliced from interrogations, strung together into confession. "I tampered with evidence. I planted what wasn't there. I let an innocent man hang." The crowd erupted in murmurs, anger, shock. "Marcus Hale is not your savior," Kendrick thundered. "He is your corruption made flesh. And every time he has come close to unveiling me, it is because I allowed him to. He has played his part beautifully. But today," Kendrick raised his hand, his ring glinting like a cue light. "Today the curtain falls, and from the balcony above, something shifted." Hale whipped around, eyes scanning. A Deputy Heller stood there, face pale, holding a rifle. His hands trembled, eyes glazed. "He's not aiming," Nina hissed. "He's being directed," Hale finished. Heller's mouth moved, forming words Hale barely caught. "He said I'd be the hero." The barrel swung toward Hale. "Narcus." Nina shoved him sideways just as the shot cracked, splintering the pew. Screams ripped through the sanctuary. Chaos detonated. Hale rolled, pulled his weapon, aimed not at Heller but at the spotlight above the balcony. The bulb shattered in sparks. Darkness flooded half the church. Heller flinched, eyes breaking free, the rifle slipping from his hands. He collapsed to his knees, sobbing. The crowd surged for the exits. Briggs roared commands lost in the din. Kendrick stood calmly at the pulpit, watching Hale through the chaos like two actors on a stage, only they understood. He set down the remote, spread his hands. "Arrest me, Marcus," he called over the chaos. "Make them believe you. Make them forget the truth I just showed them." Or his smile sharpened. "Chase me, and prove I wrote you better than you think." Then, as if scripted, Kendrick stepped back into the shadows behind the screen. A door Hale hadn't seen before slammed shut. Nina grabbed his arm. "We go after him." "We don't have backup," Hale growled. "We don't have time." She snapped back. Hale looked once at the congregation spilling into the aisles, at Alma clutching her notebook like a lifeline, at Father Cole weeping silently. Then he turned toward the door Kendrick had disappeared through, because the act wasn't over. Not yet. Chapter 10. Ashwood's Secret. The congregation turned into a current, bodies pushing for the doors, voices rising in shock that fluttered against the stained glass like trapped birds. Marcus Hale and Nina Park slipped behind the screen where Kendrick had vanished. The thin wood wobbled, catches rattling, a hinge protesting as if the church itself disliked covert exits. A short service corridor ran along the sanctuary's north wall utility cabinets, a metal door to the bell stairs, the smell of old wax. Kendrick had known this path like a stagehand. Hale tasted copper in his mouth, adrenaline dissolving what was left of the sedative. "Left," Nina said, already moving. They burst into the sacristy, empty vestments, swaying slightly, as if someone had brushed past hard. A second door stood ajar, light from the boiler room ghosting across tile. "Cole," Hale said, because something in the air felt wrong. They found Father Gabriel on the floor of the boiler room, duct tape at his wrists and ankles, a strip still stuck to one cheek, where Nina yanked the rest away. A digital timer sat on a milk crate beside him, wires leading to a solenoid clamped over the gas valve, one of the exact timer modules Hale had seen in R&S receipts. The timer blinked down from 057, 056. Nina pivoted for the next door. "I'll chase." Hallie dropped to the valve, hands already on the knurled clamp. Go, she vanished up the service stairs like a promise. Father Cole's breath stuttered. "I'm fine," he managed. "Go. The last time a man told me that in a boiler room, a wing burned," Hale said, voice thin but steady. He traced the wiring with his eyes clean, simple, smug. The module took 9 volts from a snap connector, drove the solenoid through a tiny transistor. Pulled the wrong wire, the module might dump current. The solenoid could lock open. He jammed his thumbnail under the battery's clip and popped it. The timer kept counting backup coin cell on the board, of course. Kendrick liked redundancies. "Of course you like redundancies," Hal muttered, and pulled the solenoid spade connector, free with needle nose pliers, from Cole's toolbox. The clamp shivered slack. He spun the valve closed hard. The timer hit 023, and kept blinking into irrelevance. Father Cole let out a sound that had the rhythm, but not the words of prayer. Hale cut the tape at his wrists and ankles, hauled him to sitting. He didn't say much, Cole said, breath hitching. Only that good stories need sacrifice, he said. Ashes want altars. He's run out of poetry, Hale said. Eyes on the door. Stay with the boiler off. Lock this behind me. He sprinted back into the corridor and took the bell stairs 2 at a time. Halfway up, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Alma, no punctuation. Playing the file now. Hale pictured Alma in the back pew with Father Cole's spare keys, moving through the corridor he'd just left, her cardigan sleeves pushed up, jaw set. She'd plug Erin's flash drive into the projector, bypass whatever Kendrick had cued. She'd let Ashwood watch a pair of gloved hands lay out props. She'd freeze the frame on a signet ring. At the landing, Nina's voice carried short, sharp, a command. Hale pushed out onto the balcony. The sanctuary below was half-shadowed from the shattered spotlight. Sheriff Briggs bellowed for calm no one would give him. Margaret Hollis stood at the aisle's dead center, face washed bone-white in stained light. On the screen at the front, the fundraiser montage had been replaced. A grainy video filled the church. An off-white table, gloved hands, the signet ring flashing, a voice, lighting's fine, tape labels clean, keep the font. A collective inhale surged through the pews like a drawn bowstring. Kendrick appeared 20 feet down the catwalk, moving like a man who was accustomed to becoming the focus of rooms. He carried nothing visible but a willingness to cut through people with a glance. Nina stood at the far end, gun up, shoulders squared. "Kendrick," she said, "hands up." "Deputy Park," he said, as if he had arrived for a photo op. "You moved faster than the sheriff. Good, you take direction well. You're under arrest," Nina said. "For the murder of Rachel Whitman, Marla Dane, and Erin Vale, and for attempted murder today." He smiled in the dim like a man indulging a child. "You can't arrest a playwright for a play." Hale stepped to the rail. "You picked the wrong theater." He held up his phone, thumb on the side button. "Dispatch is live on my end. David, your monologue is going out over the air. It's recording." Kendrick's mouth twitched. "Marcus, if anyone taught us about the mutability of records, it was you." The sanctuary screen cut to a frozen frame, the hands adjusting the lamp, the ring fat and gleaming. Alma's timing had always been better than the town deserved. A murmur moved through the crowd, different than shock, more like recognition. Kendrick looked toward the screen. The muscles in his jaw responded, a small, involuntary thing. For the first time since Hale had met him, certainty hiccuped. "You lined your pockets with grief," Nina said. "You bought glitter for a murder with charity money and called it art." Kendrick's eyes came back to her. "You think they'll care?" He gestured toward the pews with his chin. "They'll go home and make lasagna and talk about the scandal. They'll give a little more next month to the pantry to feel redeemed. The game continues no matter if I'm in the booth. This town loves absolution more than truth." "That still leaves you," David Hale said. "Step down now." Kendrick looked past them to the rear balcony stairwell and judged his spacing. He took one measured step backward, the signet ring catching a last thread of light like a wink. "Don't," Nina said. He moved anyway. Nina fired. The crack snapped through the vault. Kendrick jerked, stumbled against the rail. The bullet had caught his sleeve, a toothbrush stroke of tear in the cloth. He straightened, shock blazing into a front. How dare the world scuff him? "Marcus," he called, and the easy charm stripped away. "Do you want them to see their hero shoot a man on a Sunday?" Hale's thumb pressed his phone's transmit harder, as if force could widen the signal. "You don't get to choose what they see anymore." Below, Alma's voice rose clear through Father Cole's PA, caught by a microphone she must have pilfered. "Friends, this is the file Erin Vale saved. Watch." The video zoomed, locking on the ring, the crisp cuff, the file of a crescent charm. Margaret Hollis made a small sound that started in her throat and broke somewhere no one could see. Sheriff Briggs turned toward the aisle, face dead gray, then tripped on nothing. Kendrick's eyes tracked toward Margaret, calculating. The calculation failed to find an answer. He pivoted the catwalk, shuttered and ran. Nina took off after him. Hale cut across the balcony and dove into the rear stairwell, taking steps 3 at a time, hurtling into a corridor that spat him out at a side exit. The outer door banged open into winter light. The alley behind the church fed into the back lot where parishioners' cars had once been parked with reverence. Kendrick sprinted for the fence, cleared it with the grace of someone who paid good money for personal training, and vanished down the narrow path that led behind the florist shop, toward the crosstown trailhead. Hale vaulted it slower, old injuries complaining, the last residue of the dart tugging his balance. His lungs burned but found a cadence. Nina's footsteps scissored behind him. "Left," she shouted. "He'll cut for the service road." They tore through backyards smelling of soil and laundry detergent. A dog threw itself against a chain-link fence in indignation. Kendrick's coat flashed ahead, then cut uphill into trees. The undergrowth surrendered to maintenance road gravel, then to packed dirt. The trailhead marker appeared north for Cathedral Grove 1.6. Meandered, then it was only the wet iron smell of the grove and the silence that remembered. "He's returning to his altar," Hale said between breaths. They found him where the ferns pooled in that natural amphitheater, 10 yards from the concrete service door Hale had opened the day before. He stood with his back to them, watching the light slide down the bark of an old-growth cedar. The signet ring was dull now under the canopy shade. "You didn't bring your audience," he said, without turning. "We brought enough," Nina said. She leveled her gun. "Hands." Kendrick raised them. "Do you want a confession?" he asked. "On tape, in blood. Will it make this easier for you when you close your eyes at night?" "Easier's not the point," Hale said. He stopped 5 yards away, gun up but steady. "Say their names." Kendrick's head tilted. "Curious. Who's Rachel, Marla, Erin, the ones from the old files Alma keeps like holy cards. I didn't write those first acts. Marcus, that's the part you're missing. This town learned the form long before I came on. All I did was perfect the blocking." Something cold slid along Hale's spine. "Who?" Kendrick smiled with something like pity. "You think towns like this produce only one of me? You think I had to invent it? You still believe in origins?" Behind him, the service door's shadow looked like a wound in the earth. Hale pictured bankers' boxes labeled press and photos, rehearsed rooms for crime. He pictured older clippings, 1998, 2006, the same spiral in bark. He pictured Edward Hollis's obituary photos, querset jaw, a different signet ring. He pictured Walt Briggs, his father, keeping a lid on things, because that was what law and politics called love. "That's fine," Kendrick continued. "Pretend I'm the only villain here. It will make the rest of your days comfortable. People prefer singular devils. It lets them keep their friends." He half-turned, not enough to threaten, just enough to be readable. Nina's finger tightened on the trigger. "Slow," Hale said. Kendrick looked past them into the trees, like he could see the town through trunks and fog. "You know what will really ruin you?" he asked softly. "Not that you caught me, that you liked the way it felt. Because you need the stage. Marcus, you need an enemy bright enough for the lights." "My enemy's behind you," Hale said, and Kendrick's reflex turned his head. Nina moved. In the half-second his attention drifted. She closed the gap, kicked the back of his knee, drove her shoulder into his center. He folded with a shocked sound. Pride failing first, body second. Hale stepped in, wrenched the dart gun from his pocket, spiked it into the mud, and stripped the signet ring from Kendrick's finger. You could feel a man lose power right at the cuticle. Hale cuffed him while Nina covered with both hands in everything she had left. Kendrick breathed hard under the weight of two people who had decided the act ended here. "David Kendrick Hale," said, voice audible even to himself, "you are under arrest." The moment held. The trees leaned. The town waited with its breath pulled in. Kendrick stared up at the canopy as if he'd be remembered there. "You'll find another," he said, the last scrap of his certainty clinging like an old taste. "Because Ashwood needs a shape to hang its fear on. When you cut me down, it'll start whittling again." "We'll be here," Nina said. "You won't be invited next time," he murmured, and smiled once more like a final stage cue. They marched him out through the service door and the concrete stair, past the workshop where Hale had taken inventory of a man's sickness, past the spiral carved into the wall. By the time they spilled into the sacristy, the sanctuary was different. The video had done its work. Alma stood at the pulpit, Father Cole beside her, one hand steadying papers that didn't need steadying. People had not left. They had stayed, stunned into something like attention. Sheriff Briggs met them in the aisle like a wall that had learned to move. His eyes went to the cuffs, to Kendrick's mud-streaked suit, to the absence of the ring. He reached and Nina pivoted, placing herself between. Briggs's hand hovered in the air, a strange beat, then dropped. "Put him in holding," he said, voice rusted. "State will want him by sundown." Hale looked up at the screen one last time, paused on the ring, the cuff, the pale flash of a crescent charm. The town's murmurs had changed. Not quite understanding, something less polite. Margaret Hollis stepped to the aisle as they passed. For a heartbeat, Kendrick's mask cracked. He tilted his head toward her, seeking some old permission. Margaret did not look at him, her gaze fixed on the ring in Hale's palm. Not at the engraving, at the idea. Something moved in her face, a shadow of recognition, yes, but attached to a grief older than this particular man. She turned and walked out. They put Kendrick in a cruiser. Dispatch recorded Briggs's voice as he reported the arrest, carefully, like reading the steps of a recipe in someone else's kitchen. Other sirens answered, the slow, stapleless kind, patient, inevitable. In the afternoon's thin light, people drifted home through the thaw. The church emptied. The screen was raised. Wax was scraped from holders. Hal and Nina sat on the front steps, coats open, steam lifting off their shoulders in the cold, as if something in them still smoked. "You okay?" she asked. He watched his hand open and close around the ring, as if he needed to confirm he hadn't imagined the metal. "Ask me on a day this wasn't born to happen." Nina leaned her head back, eyes closed. Glitter still lived in a seam of her collar. "We need to talk about New York someday." "We will," he said, "and let the truth be a thing with tomorrow in it." Alma appeared on the walk, clutching her notebook. The kind of woman who thought punctuation could save a town if you applied it properly. "I've already scanned the video," she said, almost apologetic, like a kid confessing to doing extra homework. She sobered. "This wasn't the first act." "I know," Hale said. Her eyes softened in a way that had nothing to do with kindness. "You're not done," she said. It wasn't a suggestion. That night, the sawmill's silhouette looked less like bones and more like a note in a bad key. Hale stood at his kitchen sink with the lights off, the town's houses beaming their domestic theater into the dark. He kept the ring in an evidence bag on the table, the signet face turned toward the ceiling, the stylized K, smaller now that it didn't sit on a hand, leaving fingerprints on policy. There was a knock at his door, not the kind you ignore. A small, polite rap, 2 beats, then stillness. Hale palmed his pistol and opened up. Leah Whitman stood on the porch, cheeks raw from the wind, a sweater thrown over a t-shirt that read Pacific Coast in cracked letters. She looked like sleep would be a trespass she'd prosecute. "I wanted to see you," she said simply. "Before this town decides what it thinks happened." He stepped aside. She came in and stood without touching anything, as if the room had a geometry that mattered. "You said you'd try," she said. "You did more than that." "It won't undo it," he said. "No," she said. "But you made the story remember her name." Leah's eyes flicked to the bag on his table. "Is that his ring, for now?" He didn't have words for why he was glad she saw it. Leah nodded, as if ring and bag were proof not of guilt but of weight, and turned to go. At the door she paused. "This isn't over." "I know," he said. When she'd gone, when the street had reclaimed its quiet, Hale locked the door and sat again. The ring glinted faintly. On his porch, where the spiral had been carved nights ago, he'd sanded the wood and filled the gouges. The repair took, mostly. Even when he pretended not to see the scar, he could feel it under his boot heel. He poured bourbon and didn't drink it. The phone on his table buzzed a text. "No contact name. Check your mailbox." He didn't bother with lights. He crossed his yard soft as a burglar and opened the rusty lid. A small cardboard box waited inside, neatly taped. He carried it to the sink, cut it with his pocket knife. Inside, on white tissue, lay a piece of bark curved rough. A symbol had been carved into it long before tonight. Spiral intersected with jagged lines, edges softened by time. A blood smear browned to rust darkened one curve. Beneath the bark, folded once, a photocopy of a newspaper clipping. "Woman found near Old Mill Road, 1998. In the corner, circled in pen, a man stood half turned away from the camera. Profile blurred, a signet ring chiming on his hand, the face not a K, a different crest entirely, a single line typed beneath in 12-point font, the same cheap elegance as every one of Kendrick's notes. You caught the director, try the author. Hale stared at the bark until the spiral surfaced and submerged. He set it down and finally lifted the bourbon, but only to rinse the taste out of his mouth. He looked at the ring on his table and then at the old photograph's blur. He could hear the town settle the late trains on the freight line, a dog announcing the moon like it was news, a far siren unhurried. Sunday had ended. Monday would begin with specials at Millie S. and casseroles for the Vale family and fundraisers put on pause. He turned the porch light off and let the dark back in. He had learned how to sit with it. He could learn again. On his phone, he typed a message he would send to no one. Case file, Ashwood open. Then he deleted it and shut the phone face down. Outside, the river talked to itself behind the mill. Somewhere, in a drawer kept for heirlooms and weaponry, another ring waited on another hand. Somewhere, a shape that loved stories more than people checked a calendar and sharpened a tool. The stage would be struck and rebuilt. That was how it worked. The town would half forget and half remember. The truth would be the last guest to leave. Marcus Hale pulled a chair to the window and watched Ashwood breathe, counting the beats between streetlights. He felt, for the first time in weeks, the bone-deep ache of sleep. He let his eyes close, not all the way. Tomorrow he'd go back to Alma and the boxers. He'd sit with Father Cole and ask about 1998, and names no one wanted to say. He'd knock on Margaret Hollis's door and ask what kind of rings men in her house used to wear. He'd ask the town not for absolution, but for its records. He leaned his head back, the house quiet around him, the cut of the spiral under his heel letting him know where he stood. The bourbon sat in its glass, forgotten again, and the symbol on the bark in the sink dried into permanence. The curtain had fallen. The orchestra packed up. The audience went home. But somewhere in the wings, someone whispered the line every stage waits for: encore.